Chapter 1. A Chance to Prove. The wind roared in Izuku's ears as he stood at the edge of the rooftop, his shoes barely gripping the concrete. Far below, the streets buzzed with life. People passed by, laughing, talking, using quirks as naturally as breathing. Things he could only watch from a distance. Things he would never have. His fingers curled into fists at his sides. Memories began to surface, one after another. The doctor's voice, calm and final, telling him he was quirkless. Bakugo's cruel words, sharp as ever, telling him to take a swan dive off the roof. All Might, his hero, gently but firmly crushing his dream. Then came the moment that still twisted his chest. Running forward despite his fear, trying to save Bakugo. The way his body moved before his mind could stop it. And what did it earn him? Scolding. While Bakugo stood there, praised like always. His breath trembled. Then he thought of his mother. Her warm smile, her soft apologies, the way she blamed herself. The only person who truly cared about him. A part of him didn't want to do this. But another part whispered that it would be easier. For everyone. "I'm sorry, Mom," he murmured, his voice almost lost to the wind. He took a shaky breath. "I don't want to burden you anymore." And before he could think again, he stepped forward. The air rushed past him as he fell, faster and faster, the ground nowhere in sight. His heart pounded, his body stiff with instinctive fear. Seconds passed. But he never hit the ground. Izuku's eyes snapped open. Instead of pavement, he saw the dim walls of an alleyway. His body dangled awkwardly, his world tilted upside down. Someone was holding him by the ankle. A moment later, he was dropped onto the ground. "Why the hell did you jump off that building, kid?" a voice demanded. Izuku in a few shaky breaths, trying to steady himself. He had just jumped. He had actually jumped. Slowly he looked up. The man standing before him wasn't what he expected. He was tall, even taller than All Might, but much leaner. Messy orange hair framed a sharp face, and piercing teal eyes stared down at him, unreadable. "I think him," Izuku stammered, his voice catching in his throat. "Well?" the man pressed, waiting. "Why did you save me?" Izuku asked, his voice small, almost unsure if he wanted to hear the answer. The man raised a brow, then crossed his arms, studying him like the question itself didn't make sense. "Why wouldn't I?" he replied. "Someone your age shouldn't be diving headfirst toward death." Izuku flinched slightly at that, his gaze dropping to the ground. His fingers curled against the rough pavement, gripping it like it might steady the storm inside him. "It's not that simple," he muttered. "You were that kid from the sludge incident," the man said, his gaze sharpening as he looked down at him. "Funny how they brushed off your bravery and praised someone else's mistake." Izuku's breath caught in his throat. His hands clenched tighter against the ground, nails scraping lightly against the rough concrete. "I just moved," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think. I just wanted to help." The man studied him for a moment, then tilted his head, as if seeing something others had missed. "And that," he said quietly, "is exactly why it mattered." Izuku looked up, eyes wide, caught off guard by the certainty in his voice. Who are you?" Izuku asked, hesitating as he pushed himself up slightly. "You're not any hero I've ever seen, and I'm pretty sure you're not a villain either." The man let out a quiet huff, something almost like amusement flickering across his face. "Pretty sure, huh?" he said, one brow lifting. "That's a bold assumption for someone who just threw himself off a building." Izuku flushed, his gaze snapping away. You don't feel like one," he mumbled, rubbing the back of his neck. For a moment, the man said nothing. The alley fell into a brief, uneasy silence. Then he uncrossed his arms and glanced up, eyes tracing the narrow strip of sky above them. "Good," he said simply. Izuku blinked, caught off guard. "Huh." The man's gaze returned to him, sharp and steady, like he was looking straight through him. "Because I'm neither." "What's your name, kid?" the man asked, his tone a little less sharp than before. "Izuku," he answered, swallowing before adding, "Izuku Midoriya." The man repeated it quietly under his breath, as if testing how it sounded. Then, without another word, he extended a hand toward him. Izuku stared at it for a moment, unsure. "I can tell you wanted to be a hero," the man began, his hand still held out steadily. "Not for fame. Not for attention. To save people, even if you think you're weak." Izuku's eyes widened slightly at that. His breath hitched, caught off guard by how accurately the stranger had read him. "I respect that," the man continued. "Take my hand and I'll guide you toward that goal." For a moment, Izuku didn't move. The alley felt quieter than it should have, like the world itself was waiting for his answer. Those years of being everyone's punching bag, of hearing it over and over again that he could never be a hero, pressed heavily in Izuku's chest. The laughter, the dismissive looks, the words that had slowly carved themselves into his thoughts until he almost believed them himself. And now there was this man. Someone who had seen him for less than an hour. Someone who didn't laugh. Didn't hesitate. Didn't tell him to give up. Someone who actually said he could become a hero. Izuku's hands trembled slightly as he looked at the offered hand. It felt unreal, like a mistake the world would correct any second. His throat tightened. "Why?" he whispered, barely able to get the word out. "Why would you say that to me?" "Because you have a heroic heart," the man answered without hesitation. His voice was steady, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Not praise meant to soothe. Not empty comfort meant to be kind. A simple fact he expected to be understood. There was no pity in it. No mockery. Nothing that made Izuku feel small or broken. Only certainty. Izuku stared at the hand for a long moment. His breathing was uneven, his thoughts loud, messy, overwhelming. Every instinct told him to doubt it, to question it, to assume it wasn't real. But his fingers moved anyway. Slowly at first, then with a shaky resolve, Izuku reached out and took his hand. "Please, teach me to become a hero," Izuku said, his voice cracking slightly on the last word. The moment it left his mouth, something inside his chest shifted. Lighter, as if a weight he had carried for years had finally been set down. And heavier too, because now it was real. There was no taking it back. The man smirked faintly, like he had been waiting for exactly that answer. "You're now under my tutelage." Present day. At UA's Gym Gamma, the air hummed with the sounds of training. Explosions cracked in the distance, bursts of energy flashed across the wide arena, and the ground bore the marks of countless quirks pushed to their limits. Class 1A was going all out. Among them, 3 students stood out, pushing themselves harder than the rest. Achiko Uraraka floated and dropped chunks of debris in rapid succession, sweat beading on her forehead. Tsuyu Azui leapt across the training ground with precision, her movements sharp and controlled. Eijiro Kirishima hardened his body again and again, taking heavy hits without backing down. They weren't just training. They were preparing. Preparing for the Shai Hasaikai raid, deployed under Sir Naitai's orders. "You guys are really going at it?" a voice called out. Shinso Hitoshi stood off to the side, arms loosely at his sides as he watched them, his expression calm but observant. "Well, yeah," Kirishima replied, rolling his shoulders as his hardened skin cracked back to normal. "We wave to improve for our work studies." Tsuyu landed lightly beside them, wiping a bit of sweat from her cheek. "And on top of that," she added, her voice steady but quieter now, "we might get into tough situations in the field. So we've got to train harder," Kirishima said, clenching his fists as determination burned across his face. "We're gonna work our best." Without waiting, he charged forward and slammed straight into the cement wall. The impact thundered through the gym. Cracks spread across the surface like a web, dust bursting into the air as fragments of concrete broke loose and clattered to the ground. Kirishima didn't stop. He pushed through it, teeth gritted, forcing himself to endure more, to be stronger. He had to be. Shinso watched for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he let out a small breath and turned away. "I'll leave you guys to it," he said casually, already stepping back. As he walked off, his capture scarf flicked through the air, snapping and coiling with practiced precision as he continued his own training, movements quiet but deliberate. In the UA conference room, the atmosphere was tense. Teachers and staff sat gathered around the long table, files spread out before them as discussions circled around the upcoming Hasaikai raid and the involvement of 6 of their students. The weight of that decision alone was enough to keep everyone on edge. But that wasn't the only thing on their minds. For the past 3 years, a vigilante group known as Zenith had been operating in the shadows. Efficient, precise, and impossible to predict. Now, everything had changed. Word had come directly from Japan's president. Zenith was to be recognized and allowed to operate legally. No explanation. No details. Just an order. And none of the pro-heroes liked it. What made it worse was the request that followed. The leader of Zenith had asked for UA's first-year hero students to be sent to their island. For training. The room fell into a heavy silence just thinking about it. Their activity reports have always been unusual, Midnight said, flipping through a file, her brows slightly furrowed. They show up, handle incidents, and vanish before pro-heroes can even get there. And now, Present Mike added, his usual energetic tone noticeably restrained, we're being told they're operating legally. That was the part that didn't sit right with anyone. Legal didn't mean understood, and it definitely didn't mean trusted. It's also strange that the ship escorting the students arrives tomorrow, Nizu said calmly. The very same day as the raid. The room tightened instantly. The shift in atmosphere was almost physical. A few staff members exchanged uneasy glances, the kind that said they were all thinking the same thing but didn't want to be the first to say it. That can't just be timing, Present Mike muttered, his usual energy dulled, voice lower than normal. It feels too convenient, Midnight added, arms crossed tightly as she leaned back in her chair. Her expression had lost its usual ease, replaced with sharp suspicion. Nizu tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing just a fraction. Convenient, or intentional, he said. Then his gaze shifted. What do you think, All Might? The room quieted further. All Might sat still for a moment, his usual brightness absent as he stared down at the scattered files in front of him. His jaw tightened slightly, as if weighing words carefully before letting them out. I may not know their leader well, he said at last, voice steady but low, but I do know this much. His eyes lifted, serious now. If they want our students there on the same day as the raid, then that group is likely targeting the Shy Hasaikai as well. Aizawa's phone rang suddenly, cutting through the tension in the room like a blade. He clicked his tongue lightly and stood. Sorry. I have to take this, he said, already turning toward the door. The room stayed suspended in uncertainty as he stepped out, the door sliding shut behind him. Nizu adjusted his posture slightly, returning his attention to the table. Well then, he said calmly, let us continue discussing what we will do regarding Zenith. Right, All Might agreed, though his expression remained tense. We need to decide carefully whether we should accept their invitation or not. And if they should be trusted. Cementos added. Before the discussion could continue further, the door slid open again. Aizawa stepped back inside. But something about him had changed. His usual tired demeanor was gone, replaced with a sharp seriousness that immediately drew everyone's attention. Nizu, he said, eyes locked directly on the principal. Turn on the news. The room went silent. Nizu didn't question it. He simply reached forward and pressed a button on the table. A screen flickered to life on the wall, the UA emblem fading into a live broadcast. A reporter stood on screen, visibly shaken. Wind whipped violently behind her, police barricades filling the background. The scene was chaotic, urgent. We are receiving breaking reports from the outskirts of the city, she said quickly, voice tight. Multiple members of the Shy Hasaikai and their base have been frozen in ice. The camera shifted. The remains of the mansion came into view. What should have been the Hasaikai headquarters was now a shattered ruin of frozen destruction, the entire structure encased in thick, unnatural ice. At the center of the devastation stood the figures of the Shy Hasaikai themselves. Frozen solid like statues caught in the middle of a nightmare. And at the heart of it all was Overhaul, suspended in ice, completely immobilized, his expression locked in silent shock and fury. The staff stared in utter shock. The Shy Hasaikai base had been erased. Not just defeated, not just raided, but completely reduced to a wasteland of frozen ruin and shattered stone. A criminal organization that had taken years of intelligence gathering, planning, and coordination from pro-heroes had been wiped out in a single moment. Silence filled the conference room like a heavy fog. "That's impossible," President Mike said at last, his voice stripped of its usual volume. It came out small, disbelieving. Midnight slowly lowered her hand from her mouth, her eyes still fixed on the frozen image on the screen. "That level of ice," she murmured. "That isn't a normal ice quirk. Not even close." Nizu's expression sharpened, the calmness in his eyes turning into something far more analytical. "No," he said quietly. "It isn't." All Might leaned forward slightly, his brows drawn tight. "Then what are we looking at?" Aizawa didn't answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the screen, as if replaying what he had just heard through his phone call, trying to align it with what they were seeing. "It wasn't a raid outcome," he said finally, eyes narrowed. "It was an execution." "Sir, have you seen the news?" Mirio Togata burst into the office, the door slamming open behind him. Sir Night-Eye looked up from his desk, calm as ever at first glance. But the moment his eyes met Mirio's, something in his gaze sharpened. "You're late for composure, Togata," he said evenly. Mirio didn't even flinch at the reprimand. He stepped forward, urgency in every movement, his usual bright energy replaced with something far more serious. "This isn't the time for that," he said quickly. "The news about the Shy Hasaikai." His voice caught. He paused, swallowing hard, like even saying it out loud didn't feel real. "They're gone," he continued, quieter now. "The entire base. It's been frozen over. Completely wiped out." For the first time, Night-Eye's expression shifted. "What?" "Check the news," Mirio urged, his voice tight with urgency. Night-Eye didn't argue. He turned slightly and switched on the television. The screen flickered to life, and there it was. The aftermath played in stark clarity. The ruined Hasaikai compound, buried under layers of unnatural ice. Paramedics and authorities moved carefully through the scene, dragging out frozen members of the Yakuza one by one, their bodies stiff, preserved like lifeless statues. Mirio stood still, watching. His usual smile was nowhere to be found. His fists slowly clenched at his sides, knuckles whitening as the reality sank in. Night-Eye said nothing. His eyes followed every detail on the screen, analyzing, calculating. This wasn't part of the future he had foreseen, not even close. The entire operation, the carefully constructed plan to infiltrate and dismantle the Hasaikai, had been rendered meaningless in an instant. "This changes everything," he murmured under his breath, his gaze hardened slightly. Someone else moved first. On a secluded island, far from the mainland, a metallic ship eased into the docks with a low mechanical hum. The waves lapped quietly against the hull, the only sound in the otherwise still air. The ramp lowered with a hiss. A figure stepped out first. A boy with long, pale blue hair, dressed in winter gear despite the mild climate. A thick neck warmer covered the lower half of his face, leaving only his calm, cold eyes visible. "You're back sooner than expected." The voice came from ahead. The orange-haired man stepped forward, teal eyes locking onto the newcomer with quiet intensity. "How did the mission go, Renji?" Renji didn't hesitate. "Success," he answered simply. "The Yakuza were taken down without issue. We secured the quirk erasing bullets as well." There was no pride in his tone. Just a statement of fact. The man's gaze softened slightly at that, but he said nothing. Renji stepped aside, turning back toward the ship. Then, he added, voice just a fraction softer, "We rescued the girl." Another figure emerged from the ship. Small and fragile, in the arms of someone familiar. Messy green hair. Steady grip. Careful, protective posture. Izuka Midoriya stepped onto the dock, holding the girl gently as if she might break at the slightest movement. The man's expression shifted, just barely. "Great work, Izuku." Chapter 2, Zenith Island. The docks at Choshi were alive with quiet tension. Waves rolled steadily against the harbor, seagulls cried overhead, and the scent of salt hung in the air. Class 1A stood gathered alongside their homeroom teachers, bags at their sides, eyes scanning the horizon as they waited for the ship that would take them to Zenith's Island. After what the UA staff had witnessed the day before, the decision hadn't come easily. But in the end, they accepted the invitation. Now everyone was here. Pro heroes lined the dock as well. Hawks leaned casually against a railing, though his sharp eyes missed nothing. Ryukyu stood nearby, calm but attentive. Fatgum chatted quietly with a few students, while Sir Night-Eye remained still, his gaze distant and calculating. The big three stood together not far from him, though Mirio's usual smile was noticeably strained. Of course they were here. Some of the students were still under their supervision for work studies. But for Night-Eye and Mirio, this wasn't just an escort. They were here to see the people who had dismantled their entire operation before it even began. "Listen up," Aizawa's voice cut through the low chatter. The students straightened almost instantly. "We're heading somewhere completely unfamiliar," he continued, his tired eyes scanning the group. "So I expect you all to be on your best behavior. And as for us," Hawks added with a light shrug, though his tone carried an edge, "we're here because some of you still have ongoing work studies." A brief pause settled over the group, the wind picked up slightly. "You sure you want to come along, All Might?" Vlad asked, glancing at him with a hint of concern. "Shouldn't you be resting?" All Might gave a small, reassuring smile, though there was something more thoughtful behind it. "I'll be fine," he said. "I just want to meet these people myself." Before anyone could say more, a deep mechanical hum rolled across the harbor. All eyes turned toward the sea, and something enormous was approaching. At first, it looked like a floating structure rather than a ship. But as it drew closer, its details became clear, and the sheer scale of it left the students frozen in place. The vessel dwarfed everything around it. Its body shimmered in a striking blend of gold and silver, sunlight glinting off its polished surface like a moving beacon. Thick, reinforced plating layered the front, giving it a presence that felt less like transportation and more like an unstoppable force cutting through the water. Even the pro heroes fell quiet for a moment, taking it in. "That's huge," Kaminari shouted, eyes practically sparkling as he leaned forward. "I'll say," Jair muttered, though even she couldn't hide her surprise. The ship slowed as it reached the docks, the low rumble of its engines fading into a steady hum. Then, with a heavy metallic sound, the ramp began to lower. At the upper railing stood an old man, his bluish-white hair drifting like clouds in the wind. He rested his hands on the rail, looking down at them with a wide, almost theatrical grin. "All aboard the Mother Z," he called out, his voice booming across the harbor. "All right, everyone, let's move," Aizawa said, already stepping forward without waiting for hesitation to build. "You heard Aizawa," Ida shouted, immediately snapping into action with a sharp chop of his hand. "We must proceed aboard in an orderly manner." That was all it took. The students began to file onto the ramp, their earlier shock slowly shifting into cautious curiosity as they stepped onto the massive vessel. Pro heroes followed close behind, maintaining watchful eyes over the group. The moment their feet touched the deck, the difference became obvious. The ship's floor was so polished it almost looked like glass, reflecting their silhouettes clearly with every step. The metal beneath them felt solid, stable, almost unnaturally well-crafted, like it had been designed not just for transport, but for something far more advanced. Even the usual chatter quieted slightly as everyone took in the sheer quality of the place they were entering. Soon, the engines of the Mother Z rumbled deeper, a steady, powerful hum that vibrated through the entire deck. The massive vessel pulled away from the dock with slow, controlled precision, cutting through the water as it began its course toward Zenith's Island. Choshi Harbor grew smaller behind them, the shoreline gradually shrinking until it became just another line on the horizon. A quiet stillness settled over the group. One by one, the students moved closer to the railings, their eyes drawn forward to the endless stretch of ocean ahead. The vast blue sea reflected the sky, calm on the surface, yet carrying an unspoken weight of uncertainty about what waited beyond it. Some leaned forward slightly, curious. Others stood more rigid, tense with anticipation. The pro heroes kept their positions, scanning the horizon and the ship alike, never fully relaxing even as the voyage began. And as the ship pressed onward, everyone stared ahead into the open sea, toward a destination none of them truly understood yet. "So, when will we arrive?" All Might asked the captain, stepping a little closer as the ocean wind swept across the deck. "About a few hours," the captain replied without looking away from the sea. Then his eyes flicked briefly toward All Might. "You seem nervous." "Oh," All Might chuckled lightly, rubbing the back of his head. "I'm just looking forward to meeting Zenith." The captain studied him for a moment longer, as if weighing something unspoken. Then he turned his gaze back to the horizon, expression shifting into something more thoughtful. "I should warn you," he said calmly, voice lower now. "Once we arrive, I suggest you all don't put too much emphasis on quirks." All Might's smile faded just slightly. "What do you mean by that?" The captain didn't answer immediately. The ship pressed forward through the water. "Just a warning," he said at last. "Zenith doesn't look at power the way most of you do." A few hours later, and the students were wandering across the ship, some just sat down, not wanting to be seasick. "Aren't you a bit excited, Shinso?" Uraraka asked with a bright smile, leaning slightly on the railing. "I guess so." Shinso replied after a pause, his tone still calm, though his eyes lingered on the open sea ahead. "Who do you think we'll meet there?" Azui asked, her voice steady as always. "I'm pretty sure they're strong," Kirishima said immediately, fists tightening with enthusiasm. "I mean, they're the ones training us. They've gotta be insane." From a little further down the rail, Kendo of Class B leaned in casually, arms folded as she joined the conversation. "I heard," she said, her voice lowering slightly, "that one of them gave Endeavor a tough time just a year ago." That statement changed the mood almost instantly. A few students went quiet, exchanging looks. Even the wind felt a little heavier for a moment as the name of the number one hero settled into the air like a weight. "Wait, you serious?" Tetsu shouted, leaning forward with his usual intensity, eyes wide with disbelief. "An old man in my neighborhood saw it happen and told the whole area," Kendo replied calmly, as if it was just another piece of local gossip rather than something involving the number one hero. "I'm even more hyped to meet these guys," Kirishima said immediately, pumping his chest with a grin that returned just as fast as the tension had risen. "If they can push even Endeavor, then they've gotta be insane." A sharp laugh cut in from behind them. "Of course you're excited," Monoma mocked, stepping into view with a smug grin. "You're just drawn to people who cause chaos, just like your class." Kirishima's expression tightened slightly at that, his enthusiasm flickering for a brief moment. "Monoma," Kendo said sharply, turning toward him with a warning tone. Before he could say anything else, her hand snapped forward in a clean, precise motion, striking the back of his neck. Monoma went limp instantly, collapsing without a sound. A beat of silence followed. Then a loud announcement echoed across the ship. "Attention passengers, we are now arriving at our destination." Everyone turned in unison toward the horizon. There, emerging from the mist of the sea, was a massive island. It loomed ahead like something untouched by the outside world, its coastline sharp and natural, cliffs rising in layered formations while dense greenery stretched far beyond what the eye could easily track. The Mother Z slowed as it approached the docks, its enormous frame casting a wide shadow over the water before finally aligning with the harbor. With a deep mechanical hum, it settled into place. The ramp lowered, and the instant it touched the dock, the tension snapped. Students moved first, bursting forward with a mix of excitement and disbelief, voices rising as they stepped onto unfamiliar ground. Pro heroes followed more steadily, scanning every angle of the island with cautious focus, their instincts already on alert. The air here felt different. Heavier, quieter. Like the island itself was watching them back. Still, that didn't stop the students from looking around in awe, taking in every detail of the strange new place that would become their training ground. "Welcome, everyone, to Zenith Island," the orange-haired man announced, his voice carrying easily across the docks. "My name is Chao S., leader of Zenith." A quiet ripple of reaction passed through the group at the introduction. A pleasure, All Might replied with his usual warmth, though his eyes stayed sharp and observant. So you're the one behind Zenith? Indeed, Wes said simply, turning on his heel as if the matter was already settled. Now then, come with me. I'll give you all a tour. He began walking without hesitation, expecting them to follow. For a brief moment, the group lingered, exchanging glances. Pro heroes subtly adjusted their positions, students instinctively tightened their formations, and Aizawa gave a small, silent signal that they should move. Then one by one they followed. The docks gave way to a wide stone path leading inland. The island air was different from the harbor, quieter in a way that made every sound feel clearer. The trees ahead were dense and tall, forming a natural corridor that seemed almost intentional in its design. Chawes walked at a steady pace, hands in his pockets, as if he wasn't leading dozens of heroes and students into unknown territory, but simply guiding guests through a familiar place. Inside, the students fell into stunned silence. What they were seeing didn't match what they had expected at all. The path opened into a vast, carefully designed complex that looked less like a hidden island base and more like a private resort fused with a professional training facility. Lush landscaping surrounded clean, modern architecture, with walkways and structures built with precision that made everything feel intentional rather than decorative. Ahead of them stretched a massive open training field, far larger than anything they had seen at UA outside of specialized facilities. The ground was reinforced and segmented, clearly designed to withstand high-level combat training. Beyond that stood two towering buildings, sleek and imposing, rising high above the treeline like twin pillars. Between them and slightly further back was a colossal dome structure. Its scale alone drew everyone's attention immediately. It was enormous, comparable to the USJ in size, if not larger. For a moment, even the most confident students went quiet, taking it in. This is a training island? Komori from Class B muttered under her breath. Pro heroes scanned the surroundings more carefully now, their expressions shifting from curiosity to evaluation, already trying to understand how something like this could exist outside official hero infrastructure. Hess continued walking ahead as if the reaction was expected. This place is even bigger than I thought, Shinso murmured, genuinely caught off guard as his eyes tracked the scale of everything around them. Uraraka and the others were still looking around in amazement when Tsuyu raised her hand slightly. Excuse me, sir, she asked politely. Where are all the people here? Chus didn't slow his pace. He simply glanced over his shoulder as he walked. Oh, my children are at the far end of the island, he said casually. They'll be back soon enough. In the meantime, you should all head to your accommodations. He gestured ahead. The group followed his motion and finally saw it clearly. A massive dormitory building stood waiting at the edge of the complex. It was easily 4 times the size of Heights Alliance, its structure rising with clean, reinforced design that suggested both comfort and durability. Long rows of windows lined its sides, and multiple entry points suggested it was built to house far more people than they currently saw. Even the pro heroes exchanged brief glances at the scale of it. Choes stopped in front of it at last. You'll be staying here for the next 2 weeks, he said simply, as if announcing something ordinary. All right, everyone, let's head inside and unpack, Aizawa ordered, his voice carrying that familiar edge of finality. Tomorrow, you'll begin training with Zenith. All right. Mirio called out immediately, his enthusiasm returning in full force. I can't wait to see what these people have prepared for the first years. It's going to be overwhelming, Tamaki muttered under his breath, shoulders slightly hunched as he followed the group inside. One by one, the students and pro heroes moved into the massive dormitory, the doors sliding open to reveal a clean, spacious interior design to accommodate far more than they had expected. But not everyone followed. Sir Night-Eye remained outside. His gaze was locked directly onto Choes, sharp and unblinking. The air between them felt noticeably heavier as the distance between the others widened. So you're the one who ruined our operation, Night-Eye said flatly. Choes didn't even turn to look at him. Watch your tone, he replied calmly. We handled the situation without civilian casualties. The target was neutralized, and the girl was secured safely. That's all that matters. Night Eye's expression tightened. Where is she now? A brief pause followed. She's with the others, Quirkless said at last. Recovering. Emotionally and otherwise. He finally glanced back slightly, though his eyes remained distant. And placing her anywhere near your operation would have slowed that process. Then, without waiting for a response, he turned and began walking again, as if the conversation had already ended in his mind. Night Eye stood there for a moment longer, watching Choes disappear into the islands. Pathways. His expression remained tight, unreadable, but the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. After a brief silence, he finally turned and headed inside after the others. Inside the dormitory, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Whoa, the living space is huge, Kirishima said, eyes practically sparkling as he looked around. It's way bigger than Heights Alliance. The interior stretched far beyond what they had expected from the dorm. Wide hallways branched off into multiple wings, common areas opened into lounge-like spaces with open seating, and large windows let in natural light that made everything feel almost unreal compared to typical hero accommodations. Even the students who were usually more composed couldn't hide their reactions. Uraraka spun slowly, taking it all in. It feels like a hotel, she murmured. Tsuyu nodded once. It's very comfortable. Ribbit. Shinso stayed quieter, but even he looked around with subtle interest, taking mental notes of everything. The scale, the design, the silence between distant footsteps, it all felt intentional. Carefully controlled. Aizawa glanced around briefly, then gave a small sigh. Don't get distracted. This is still a training environment. Night Eye stood there for a moment longer, watching Choes disappear into the island's pathways. His expression remained tight, unreadable, but the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. After a brief silence, he finally turned and headed inside after the others. Inside the dormitory, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Whoa, the living space is huge, Kirishima said, eyes practically sparkling as he looked around. It's way bigger than Heights Alliance. The interior stretched far beyond what they had expected from the dorm. Wide hallways branched off into multiple wings, common areas opened into lounge-like spaces with open seating, and large windows let in natural light that made everything feel almost unreal compared to typical hero accommodations. Even the students who were usually more composed couldn't hide their reactions. Uraraka spun slowly, taking it all in. It feels like a hotel, she murmured. Tsuyu nodded once. It's very comfortable. Ribbit. Shinso stayed quieter, but even he looked around with subtle interest, taking mental notes of everything. The scale, the design, the silence between distant footsteps, it all felt intentional. Carefully controlled. Aizawa glanced around briefly, then gave a small sigh. Don't get distracted. This is still a training environment. It says here that your names are already placed on the doors of your dorm rooms, Vlad added, glancing down at the roster in his hands. Just find your assigned room and settle in. A brief silence followed as the students absorbed that information. They already assigned rooms? Uraraka murmured, blinking in surprise as she looked down the hallway. That's correct, Aizawa confirmed. These rooms are also adjusted to accommodate each individual student's needs. Impressive level of preparation, Ida said, pushing up his glasses with renewed seriousness. We must ensure we follow the assigned structure properly. Ooh, I've got an idea, Mina said suddenly, her eyes lighting up. Let's all go check each other's rooms and see what they look like. Oh, that's a great idea, Setsuna from Class B chimed in, nodding enthusiastically as she leaned in. A few students immediately perked up at the suggestion, curiosity spreading quickly through the group. The idea of seeing how each room was designed for different quirks and personalities was too tempting to ignore. The students began to move down the hallway in a loose, excited crowd, voices overlapping as they headed toward the first set of dorm rooms. Curiosity carried them forward, each one eager to see how their spaces had been prepared. Meanwhile, the pro heroes and big three remained behind for a moment longer. There are rooms for us heroes on the other side, Aizawa said flatly. Let's move. Hawks stretched his shoulders with an easy roll, wings shifting slightly as he did. "Guess we're getting our own tour too," he said lightly, though his eyes were already scanning the structure with quiet interest. Ryukyu gave a small nod and started walking without hesitation. Fat Gum followed close behind, his usual relaxed demeanor still present but paired with a careful awareness of their surroundings. Sir Night-Eye lingered just a moment longer. His gaze briefly drifted in the direction the students had gone, thoughts clearly elsewhere, before he turned and followed without a word. Mirio glanced back once as well, watching the students disappear down the hall. A faint smile crossed his face before he turned forward again. "Come on, guys," he said, voice brightening slightly. "Let's go." Tamaki walked just behind him, quiet as always, but his eyes tracked every detail of the corridor as they moved. Nijire bounced lightly between them, her excitement impossible to contain. "Ooh, I wonder what kind of accommodations they prepared for us," she said quickly. "Do you think it matches our quirks, or our personalities? Or both? I really can't wait to find out." As the students rounded the corner, they came upon the first marked door. Tokoyami Fumicage's nameplate was fixed neatly at the center. The moment he saw it, Tokoyami stiffened slightly. A subtle shudder ran through him, not from fear, but from anticipation. "It appears this is mine," he said quietly. "Oh, it's Tokoyami's room," Hagecure said brightly. "Let's see what he got, shall we?" Without hesitation, the group stepped inside, and immediately, they paused. The room was enormous. Far larger than anything they had expected for a single student, its scale easily comparable to a training space that could fit dozens of people comfortably. The ceiling alone gave it an open, expansive feeling, making the entire area seem almost like a private wing rather than a dorm room. But what truly caught their attention was the design. The entire space reflected Tokoyami's aesthetic almost perfectly. The lighting was dim but carefully balanced, creating deep shadows without making the room uncomfortable. The decor leaned heavily into Gothic influences, with dark tones, elegant furnishings, and intricate details that gave the space a dramatic, almost regal atmosphere. Even dark shadows seemed to stir slightly in approval. Tokoyami stood still for a moment, taking it all in. "Impressive," he said at last, his voice carrying a rare hint of appreciation. "Hey, why's your room have a cool sword on the wall?" Awaze yelled, pointing toward the far side of the room. Everyone's attention shifted at once. Mounted above a dark wooden display frame was a long, ornate blade. It wasn't decorative in the usual sense, nor did it look ceremonial. It looked real, balanced, maintained. The kind of weapon that had seen use, not just admiration. Tokoyami tilted his head slightly, studying it as if seeing it for the first time himself. "It seems they included something aligned with my aesthetic," he said carefully. "Your aesthetic is weapon on the wall?" "That's insane," someone else added from the group. "It is not mine," Tokoyami replied calmly. "However, it does fit the atmosphere." Dark shadows stirred faintly in agreement, looming slightly larger behind him as it observed the room with interest. Uraraka leaned in slightly, eyes wide. "This place really does customize everything." Shinso, standing near the doorway, narrowed his eyes just a bit as he took in the details. "It's not just decoration," he muttered under his breath. "It's profiling." "All right, let's head to the next room," Tokage said, gesturing down the hallway as the group naturally shifted forward again. Tokoyami adjusted his belongings calmly before stepping aside, allowing the others to move on. The excitement didn't fade. If anything, it only grew stronger as they anticipated what each new room would reveal. Mina leaned forward as she walked. "I wonder who's next." Kirishima grinned widely, walking with an easy bounce in his step. "This is kind of like a tour of ourselves." A few students laughed at that, the tension easing slightly as curiosity took over. They stopped in front of the next door, and Ida's nameplate was fixed neatly on it. His entire body stiffened. "And mine is next?" he said, posture locking instantly as if he had been activated by a command. "Yes, it is," Uraraka replied with a small, encouraging smile. The door slid open, and the group stepped inside. The reaction was immediate. The room was spotless. immaculate in a way that almost felt unreal. Everything was arranged with extreme precision, from the exact alignment of the furniture to the carefully structured storage spaces along the walls. The layout was large, but nothing about it felt empty. Every corner had purpose. Every object had order. Unlike Tokoyami's atmospheric darkness, this space reflected DSPLN itself. It felt less like a bedroom and more like a personal command center or miniature library, built for efficiency above all else. Even the storage shelves were arranged with meticulous care, including a section neatly lined with multiple pairs of glasses, each placed with identical spacing. Ida stood completely still for a moment, taking it all in. Then he adjusted his glasses sharply. "This level of organization is acceptable," he said, though there was a noticeable hint of pride in his voice. Kirishima laughed, pointing lightly. "Yeah, this is definitely you, man. They gave you so many glasses, shroom," Komori said, barely holding back her laughter. "Of course," Ida replied immediately, pushing his glasses up with absolute seriousness. "They must understand that I anticipate frequent damage to my eyewear during training scenarios." "Shroom? Oh, that's just what Komori does," Kendo explained with a small shrug. "She adds it at the end of sentences all the time." "Off to the next room," Hagecure shouted enthusiastically, already bouncing ahead in excitement. The group moved on quickly, their excitement not slowing even after Ida's room. And the next stop was Shishida's room. The moment they reached it, the size of the nameplate alone felt fitting for what they had already started to expect from Zenith's accommodations. When the door slid open, the group stepped inside together, and a few immediate reactions followed. The room was spacious, but not in the same refined or decorative way as the others. It carried a more grounded, functional atmosphere. Along one side stood tall bookshelves filled with carefully arranged volumes, suggesting both DSPLN and intellect. On the opposite side was a dedicated training area, complete with lifting equipment and strength-focused gear clearly designed for intense physical conditioning. It felt like a blend of study space and training ground, built for someone who balanced both mind and raw power. Kirishima let out a low whistle. "Okay, this is actually kind of awesome." Uraraka looked between the books and equipment. "It's like a library and gym combined." Shinso stayed near the doorway, quietly observing the layout. "Efficient," he muttered under his breath. "This is quite impressive," Shishida said as he stepped fully into the room, his voice carrying genuine admiration. His eyes moved from the sturdy lifting equipment to the carefully organized bookshelves, taking in every detail as if assessing how well it matched his own needs as much as his expectations. "I can train both mind and body here without interruption," he added after a moment, flexing his fingers slightly as he looked around. "They've accounted for efficiency and recovery space." Tetsu grinned at him. "Yeah, this room's totally your vibe, man." Reiko glanced around again, still impressed. "They really thought of everything for everyone, spooky." Soon, everyone moved towards the next dorm room, and that room is Rin's. "All right, Rin's turn," Tetsu said, leaning forward with excitement as the group shifted toward the next door. Rin's nameplate sat neatly at the center, and for a brief moment there was a pause, like everyone was subconsciously expecting something. The group stepped inside together. Immediately, the atmosphere changed. The room carried a strong cultural aesthetic, clearly inspired by traditional Chinese design. Elegant patterns lined the walls, and the color scheme leaned into deep reds and golds that gave the space a rich, vibrant presence. A large dragon motif stretched across part of the interior decor, detailed and carefully crafted, giving the entire room a powerful, almost mythic feel. Unlike the previous rooms, this one didn't feel like it balanced function and personality. It felt expressive, bold, and almost ceremonial in its presentation. Kirishima blinked. "Whoa, that's intense." Kendo nodded slowly. "It feels really strong." Even Todoroki raised a brow slightly, taking in the design without saying anything immediately. From the doorway, Tetsu grinned. "Yeah, that actually suits Rin pretty well." The group moved on without losing momentum, curiosity only growing with each new door they checked. The hallway felt like a living showcase, every room revealing a different side of its occupant. Soon enough, they reached the next nameplate, Kaminari Denki. Kaminari leaned in immediately, grinning. "All right, this one's mine." He opened the door, and the entire group paused. The room was instantly recognizable as his at a glance, but amplified in every possible way. The design was bright, energetic, and full of personality, with neon accents and smooth, flowing lighting patterns that shifted gently across the walls. The furniture had a modern, almost futuristic style, but everything was arranged in a way that still felt comfortable rather than overwhelming. Compared to his room at Heights Alliance, this felt like an upgraded version of Kaminari Energy, turned up several levels. Kaminari stepped inside and immediately lit up. "Yo, this is so groovy," he said, spinning slightly as he looked around. "It's like my room but on a whole different level." Jairu crossed her arms, though she couldn't fully hide her amused expression. "Yeah, this is definitely you, all right." Mina leaned in with a grin. "It's like your personality got turned into interior design." The tour continued room by room, and with each door that slid open, the students' reactions only grew louder and more varied. Tetsu, Kirishima, Kendo, Ojiro, and Shoda all shared something in common when their rooms were revealed. Each space reflected disciplined training, dojo-like interiors designed for focus and combat refinement. Wooden floors, open practice areas, and training equipment made every room feel like a personal martial arts hall, each one slightly adjusted to match its owner's fighting style. Reiko's room carried a quiet, eerie elegance, the atmosphere subdued and haunting in a way that matched her presence. Nearby, Shirai's room leaned even further into darkness, almost oppressive in its aesthetic, like shadows themselves had been carefully designed into the architecture. Jairu's space, by contrast, was vibrant and expressive, resembling a full music studio fused with rock and funk styling, complete with instruments, sound systems, and acoustics that made the room feel alive with rhythm. Komori's room surprised everyone with its whimsical design, transformed into a soft mushroom field-like environment, almost like stepping into a peaceful, miniature forest ecosystem. Momo's room immediately stood out with its refined luxury, elegant and expansive, resembling a high-end estate tailored for rich girl comfort. Ibra's room carried a deeply religious aesthetic, structured like a small church, calm and reverent in tone without feeling excessive. Kamikiri's room was sharp and aggressive in design, reflecting his edgy personality with bold, dynamic elements and a sense of constant motion. Sato's room combined practicality and comfort, blending a fully equipped 5-star kitchen with a spacious living area, clearly built around his needs for cooking and recovery. Toru's room remained consistent with her previous accommodations, bright and overwhelmingly pink, playful and lighthearted in every corner. Azui and Koda's rooms both broke away from indoor design entirely. Azui's space was centered around a peaceful pond environment, calm and natural. Koda's room expanded further into a miniature forest ecosystem, complete with small birds and a living, outdoor atmosphere that felt almost untouched by construction. And beyond them, the remaining rooms followed the same pattern of precision and personalization, each one uniquely crafted, each one reflecting its occupant in ways that were almost uncomfortably accurate. Finally, we get to see Bakugo's room, Kirishima said as the group gathered in front of the last door, anticipation building in his voice. "I hope it's not as crazy as his personality," Kaminari added with a teasing grin, earning a sharp glare from Bakugo immediately. "Shut up." Bakugo snapped as he stepped forward and shoved the door open. The room inside was large, but far from messy or overwhelming. Instead, it carried a strict, controlled design that immediately reflected its occupant. The layout was clean and structured, with a strong industrial influence running through the reinforced materials and training-focused sections. Every part of the space felt intentional, built for function first and comfort second, yet still clearly tailored to him. Kirishima blinked slowly as he took it in. "Okay, this is actually kinda cool." Kaminari scratched his head, still processing it. "Yeah, it's like angry military gym energy." Bakugo clicked his tongue, already stepping inside. Obviously they'd build it right. He dropped his things down without hesitation, scanning the room like he was already deciding how to use every inch of it. That was when his attention caught on something unexpected. A shelf lined with notebooks. Neatly arranged. Familiar in a way that made his expression shift slightly. Shinso, who had been observing quietly, spoke after a moment. I'm surprised. It's not as chaotic as I expected. He paused mid-sentence as he noticed Bakugo had gone completely still, his focus locked onto the notebooks like everything else in the room had disappeared. Bakugo held one of the notebooks in his hand, his grip unusually still, his expression completely blank in a way no one in the room was used to seeing. The usual sharpness in his eyes was gone, replaced by something quieter, almost distant, as if he had been pulled out of the present and dropped somewhere far away in his own thoughts. The room slowly shifted in mood as the others noticed. Even Kaminari stopped joking, and Mina's smile faded into curiosity. Hey, Bakugo, you okay? Kirishima asked as he stepped closer, his voice careful for once instead of loud and casual. Bakugo didn't respond. His eyes stayed locked on the notebook in his hand. It had a white cover, slightly scorched at the edges, but still intact. The pages inside were filled with dense writing, sketches, and structured analysis that looked far more detailed than anything casual. The title on the front read, Hero Analysis for the Future Volume. Silence settled over the group. Bakugo's fingers tightened slightly around the notebook, but he still didn't speak. His gaze didn't move, as if the words written inside were pulling something out of him that he hadn't expected to face here, in this place, in front of everyone. Get out. I need some time alone, Bakugo said, his voice noticeably calmer than usual, lacking the sharp edge everyone was accustomed to hearing. The room went quiet almost instantly. The shift in his tone alone was enough to throw everyone off. Normally, Bakugo would have been yelling, pushing people out, or forcing the space to himself through sheer aggression. But this time, there was no explosion, no anger, no hostility. Just control. No one moved right away, unsure how to respond to something so unfamiliar coming from him. Eventually, they understood without needing to be told twice. One by one, the students began to leave the room, choosing not to push him further. The earlier excitement of exploring dorms faded into a more subdued atmosphere as they resumed unpacking and moving through the dormitory halls. Kirishima lingered near the doorway for a moment longer than the others, his expression tight with concern as he looked at Bakugo. He didn't say anything, but the worry was clear in his eyes before he finally turned and stepped out, quietly closing the door behind him. Bakugo continued staring at the charred notebook in his hands, his grip tightening slightly as his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. The room around him felt quieter than it should have, as if everything had been pushed far away, leaving only him and the object in front of him. Deku, he muttered under his breath. How did they have this? He slowly set the notebook down on the desk in front of him, but even after letting go, his hand lingered for a moment as if reluctant to break contact. His heart was beating harder now, louder in his ears, each pulse making his thoughts more unsettled than the last. He knew these daemon well, how couldn't he? These weren't just random analysis books. They were Deku's notebooks. The handwriting, the structure, the obsessive detail in every page, it all matched what he remembered. Even the worn edges and careful organization felt familiar in a way that made his chest tighten. And that charred one in particular, he recognized it instantly. He remembered when it had been burned. He remembered why. Bakugo exhaled sharply through his nose, forcing himself to steady his breathing, but it didn't help much. His expression stayed tense, caught between disbelief and something deeper he didn't want to name yet. What the hell is going on here? He said quietly, more to himself than anyone else, eyes still locked on the notebook as if it might answer him back. Chapter 3, Beat Down, Part 1. Both classes made their way across the island early in the morning, the air still cool and quiet as the sun stretched over the horizon. The path toward the training grounds felt longer than it actually was, anticipation building with every step. Hey, have any of you guys seen Todoroki and Bakugo? Kirishima asked, glancing around as if expecting them to suddenly appear. They returned to Japan, Aizawa answered without slowing his pace. They still have remedial courses to complete, so their time here will be limited compared to yours. Kirishima blinked, scratching the back of his head. Right, that thing? A few students exchanged looks, a mix of understanding and disappointment passing between them. Uraraka looked ahead again, her expression thoughtful. Guess we'll just have to tell them everything when they get back. Shinso walked quietly among them, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed forward. Assuming we can even explain this place properly, he muttered under his breath. The group continued on until the path finally opened up. What lay ahead made several students slow to a stop. The training field stretched out endlessly, far wider than anything they had seen before, its scale almost absurd. It wasn't just large. It felt limitless, like it had been built without concern for space or boundaries. Before anyone could comment further, two figures appeared seemingly out of nowhere at the center of the field. The suddenness of it drew everyone's attention immediately. "Welcome, dear UA students," the white-haired man said with a graceful bow, his voice smooth and theatrical. "I am Gentle Agent, at your service. And this is my dearest partner, La Brava." Beside him, a small red-haired girl gave a polite, energetic greeting. "Greetings, hero students," she said brightly, her eyes shining with excitement. The students reacted almost instantly, bowing in a slightly frantic, uneven motion as they tried to return the greeting properly. Monoma, however, didn't follow along. Instead, he narrowed his eyes, studying the two figures carefully. Then his expression snapped into recognition, and his arm shot forward as he pointed straight at them. "Your gentle criminal, a villain!" Monoma shouted. "You dare show your face!" Before he could continue, Aizawa's capture scarf snapped forward and wrapped around his neck, cutting him off mid-sentence and pulling him slightly back. "Don't make a scene," Aizawa said flatly, clearly unimpressed. "They're former villains. Zenith took them in for rehabilitation. They're now operating as agents under them." The tension in the air shifted, confusion replacing hostility for most of the students. Gentle Agent adjusted his posture slightly, not offended, but clearly aware of the weight behind Monoma's reaction. There was a calm dignity in the way he carried himself now, something far more grounded than the dramatic persona he once embodied. "My reputation precedes me, it seems," he said with a soft, almost amused smile. "But I assure you I stand before you now with no ill intent." Beside him, La Brava nodded quickly, her small frame practically bouncing with sincerity. "We're here to help." The sincerity in her voice eased the atmosphere further. The students glanced at one another, the initial shock fading into cautious acceptance. "Wow, you guys were criminals, and now you've changed for the better. That's so manly," Tetsu said, already tearing up as he clenched his fists with admiration. "Well then, no time to waste, children," Gentle said with a graceful motion of his hand. "Come along." The students followed, their earlier curiosity returning as they moved toward a raised observation area overlooking the massive training field. The structure gave them a clear view of the entire space, reinforcing just how large and controlled the environment truly was. Excuse me, Mr. Gentle," Komori said, raising her hand politely as they walked. "What exactly will we be doing? I'm curious." An excellent question, dear girl," Gentle replied, glancing back with a small approving smile. "As you all are aware, you have yet to meet the members of Zenith." A few students nodded, while others leaned in slightly, clearly interested. "I do wonder who they are," Yayarozu said thoughtfully, her eyes scanning the field as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. "I want to know what they're like," Tsunatori added, bouncing lightly with excitement. "Well," La Brava chimed in, clasping her hands together, "today you'll be paired into groups of 2 and face each member in battle." A ripple went through the group at that. "Introduction through combat," Ida said, adjusting his glasses as his posture straightened. "A highly efficient method to assess capability through direct action." Gentle gave a satisfied nod. "Precisely. Words can only tell so much. Here, you will come to understand them through experience." The wind swept lightly across the field as the students looked ahead, anticipation rising again. "Now then," Gentle said, holding up a small box with practiced elegance, It is time to draw lots. The students gathered closer as names were drawn one after another, the results being announced and quickly written down. With each pairing, small reactions rippled through the group, some excited, others surprised, but all of them paying close attention as the structure of the exercise took shape. Before long, the teams were finalized. Shinso and Kodai, Aoyama and Awaze, Koda and Tsubaraba, Jairu and Kaibara, Shoji and Komori, Mineta and Yanagi, Yaoyorozu and Rin, Ojiro and Shoda, Ashido and Bando, Kaminari and Kamikiri, Hagakure and Fukudashi, Sato and Shishida, Siro and Kawaro, Azui and Tokage, Uraraka and Shiozaki, Kirishima and Tetsutetsu, Ida and Hananuki with Tsunatori, and finally Tokoyami, Kendo and Minoma. A brief silence followed as the students processed the unusual structure of the matchups. Wait, Awaze spoke up, tilting his head slightly. Why do two teams have 3 members? Gentle paused for a moment, then gave a slightly awkward but composed smile as he adjusted his posture. Well, he began, lightly scratching the back of his head, 2 members of Zenith are currently occupied with other responsibilities, and one more has stated that he does not have the time to participate. He lowered his hand and straightened again, as if that explanation settled everything. So, Labrava added cheerfully, you'll be facing the available members in adjusted match conditions. I guess that's fair, Yaoyorozu said thoughtfully, though her eyes lingered on the field as she processed the implications of uneven matchups. Oh, you're right, Labrava said, nodding as she crossed her arms with a confident little smile, because those 2 teams are going to be facing the 3rd and 4th strongest members of Zenith. That statement landed heavily. A few students stiffened slightly, exchanging quick glances as the atmosphere subtly shifted from curiosity to seriousness. Even the wind across the open field felt a little sharper now. 3rd and 4th strongest. Kirishima repeated under his breath, more to himself than anyone else, as his grin slowly returned with a more focused edge. Shinso narrowed his eyes slightly, his gaze fixed on the field below. And they're not even the top. He muttered, as if recalibrating expectations. Aizawa's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes were clearly tracking something deeper than just the matchups. Labrava, meanwhile, seemed completely at ease, as if she had just shared a simple fact rather than raised the stakes of the entire exercise. Now then, let us begin, Gentle announced, his voice echoing lightly across the massive field. The first team stepped forward, making their way down into the training grounds while the rest of the students gathered at the observation area above. Large screens flickered to life, giving everyone a clear view of the battlefield. Without warning, the environment began to change. The smooth terrain shifted and cracked, structures rising from the ground as the field transformed into a sprawling set of ruins. Broken pillars, collapsed walls, and uneven terrain spread across the area, creating a complex battlefield full of blind spots and elevation changes. The match will begin shortly, Labrava's voice came through the comms. Once it starts, you will have 20 minutes. Shinso rolled his shoulders and stretched his arms, trying to keep his movements casual, though the anticipation beneath them was hard to ignore. Beside him, Yui Kodai stood still, composed as ever. Her expression didn't change much, but her eyes stayed sharp, scanning the field as if already analyzing possible scenarios. So, should we plan this out? Shinso said, glancing at her. What's your quirk, by the way? Yui didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached down and picked up a small pebble from the ground. Holding it between her fingers, she activated her quirk. The pebble expanded instantly, growing several times its original size until it rested heavily in her palm. I can change the size of objects, she said simply. Shinso watched with clear interest, his attention fully caught. That's actually really useful. He rubbed the back of his neck slightly before adding, mine's brainwashing. If someone responds to me verbally, I can control them. He glanced out at the ruins again, thinking. Problem is, I'm not sure how we're supposed to plan against someone we haven't even seen yet. I wonder who they'll be fighting, Yaoyorozu said, her eyes fixed on the screen where Shinso and Kodai stood among the forming ruins. I hope it's someone tough. Real tough, Kirishima added, clenching his fists with excitement. Gotta be manly. Yeah, we want to see some real action. Tetsu chimed in, matching his energy. Are we late to the show? Hawk's voice cut in as he approached, the rest of the pro heroes and the big three following behind him at a steady pace. Oh, I see Kodai is up, Vlad said, arms crossed as he studied the screen with interest. Ooh, do you think they'll win? Nijire asked, bouncing lightly on her feet as she leaned forward. Who's their opponent? This is so exciting. Below, the ruins stood silent. Shinso and Kodai remained on guard, the wind brushing past broken stone as the countdown ticked closer to 0. Then, without warning, a presence made itself known. A faint shift in the air. Not loud. Not dramatic. But enough to make the atmosphere feel heavier. Shinso's posture straightened slightly, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the field. Someone's coming, he muttered quietly. Battle begin. La Brava announced through the comms, her voice echoing across the ruined battlefield. The moment the signal was given, the ground beneath Shinso and Kodai shifted violently as the terrain itself responded. Stone cracked, dust rose, and jagged formations of earth began to sprout upward like living structures, reshaping the ruins into something far more unstable and unpredictable. Aren't you two a unique pair? Both Shinso and Kodai turned sharply toward the source, their eyes widening the instant they saw her. The figure standing before them seemed almost unreal in how suddenly she had appeared, as if she had simply stepped out of the shifting battlefield itself. On the observation deck, Tsubaraba leaned forward, staring at the screen in disbelief. Am I seeing this right? He muttered, voice low with shock. Around him, the other students and pro-heroes were equally stunned, eyes locked on the unfolding scene. Standing in the ruins was a girl dressed in a gold and red bodysuit, the material catching the light in a way that made her presence feel almost regal. Her boots were reinforced with layered construction, built for impact, while her arms were protected by gauntlets formed from what looked like black metamorphic rock, rough and heavy like forged stone given purpose. But what truly silenced the room was her face. She looked exactly like Kodai. The same structure, the same expression, the same quiet intensity. But where Kodai's presence was subdued and minimal, this girl's was sharp and commanding. Dark brown hair fell around her face, interrupted by a single white streak, and her eyes glowed a striking gold that carried confidence instead of restraint. Kodai herself froze on screen, staring as if she couldn't fully process what she was seeing. Shinso, standing beside her, was just as shaken. 2 negatives against little ol' positive like me, fufufu, the girl said lightly, tilting her head with a playful confidence that didn't match the intensity of her presence. What the hell? Shinso finally managed to say, his voice breaking slightly as he tried to make sense of the situation in front of him. The girl gave them no time to adjust to her presence. Without warning, she drove her fist into the ground, and the entire battlefield responded like it was answering her command. The ruins trembled violently as massive constructs of earth erupted upward, forming 2 enormous hands that surged straight toward Shinso and Kodai with crushing force. Both of them reacted instantly, leaping away just in time to avoid being caught completely, though the attack still carried consequences. One of the earthen hands clipped Kodai's shoulder as she moved, forcing a sharp stumble from her as she regained her balance. Shinso's eyes narrowed immediately. Without hesitation, he moved toward her, slipping through the broken terrain with calculated speed before grabbing her and pulling her toward a safer position behind a collapsed wall and away from the open field where they had been exposed. He kept low, positioning them behind cover as his grip. Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Was Saved from the Brink? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Steadied her for a moment. His gaze flicked down to her shoulder, his expression tightening as he assessed the damage. You good? He asked quietly, his tone controlled but clearly focused on the situation. Kodai steadied herself, keeping her breathing measured despite the impact, while Shinso shifted his attention back toward the battlefield, already trying to map out their next move. Out in the open, the girl remained where she stood, unbothered by the destruction she had caused. The massive earth constructs slowly settled back into the ruins around her, as if they had never been anything more than an extension of her will. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze fixed on their new position. "Running already?" she called out, her voice carrying easily across the field, light and almost playful despite the overwhelming pressure she had just demonstrated. "That's no fun." "That was insane," Awais said, unable to take his eyes off the screen as he watched the aftermath of the attack settle into the ruined battlefield. His voice carried genuine shock, the kind that came from realizing the scale of what they were actually dealing with. "So she can manipulate Earth," Shoji said calmly, observing the shifting terrain with quiet focus. "A highly versatile and precise application. The range alone is dangerous." "Forget her quirk," Kaminari muttered, leaning forward slightly. "Her appearance is the real shock. She looks exactly like Yui." "Yeah, that's kind of spooky," Reiko added under her breath, her gaze lingering on the screen with a faint unease. "Yeah, but hotter," Mineta blurted out immediately, completely missing the shift in atmosphere. "I mean, look at those thighs, that firm butt and those huge boo." Before he could finish, Mina had already wrapped him tightly in Ciro's tape, yanking him back with a sharp tug that muffled the rest of his sentence entirely. "Stop being such a pervert," Mina said flatly, arms crossed as she held him in place while he struggled uselessly. "I recommend you all refrain from speaking of their abilities so casually," Gentle said, his tone calm but firm as he watched the screen with a more serious expression. "They do not respond well to being treated as simple quirks or meta abilities." The observation deck quieted slightly at that, the weight of the warning settling in as the fight below continued to unfold. "Oh yeah, I remember the boat captain mentioning something like that," All Might said, arms folded as he watched the screen with a more thoughtful expression now, as if piecing together fragments of earlier warnings. "Is there a reason why?" Mirio asked, tilting his head slightly as his usual brightness softened into genuine curiosity. Gentle Agent paused for a moment, his gaze still fixed on the battlefield below as Kodai and Shinso regrouped behind cover while the mysterious girl remained in control of the ruins. The air around him felt a little heavier, not from hesitation, but from restraint. "It is not my place to discuss their personal matters," he said at last, his tone calm but final. "I apologize." Labrava glanced up at him briefly, then back at the screen, choosing not to add anything. All Might didn't press further, though his eyes narrowed slightly in thought. Mirio also stayed quiet after that, sensing that whatever history was involved wasn't something to be casually spoken about in the middle of a live match. Below them, the battlefield continued to shift, the girl's presence still dominating the ruined terrain as Shinso and Kodai tried to regain control of the situation. "You got a plan?" Yui asked quietly, keeping her voice low as she stayed tucked behind the broken wall. Shinso went silent for a moment, eyes narrowing slightly as he looked over the battlefield, analyzing the shifting terrain and the opponent's behavior patterns. After a few seconds of thought, something clicked into place. "Okay, here's what we're going to do," Shinso said, leaning in closer and lowering his voice to a whisper as he began explaining how they would try to create an opening and force a response. Yui listened closely, her expression unchanged but her eyes tracking his reasoning with quiet focus, already preparing to adjust her movements based on what he was saying. Out in the center of the ruins, the girl who mirrored Kodai's appearance had completely relaxed her posture. In fact, she had found a broken section of terrain and reshaped it into something resembling a rough earth bed, where she now lay sprawled out as if the battlefield itself had become a lounge. She stared at the sky for a moment, then let out a long, exaggerated sigh. She muttered lazily, rolling slightly onto her side as she rested her cheek against her hand. "This is getting boring." Despite the chaos she had created earlier, her tone carried no urgency at all, as if the fight itself was something she could pause or resume whenever she pleased. Out of nowhere, a massive boulder suddenly tore through the air and hurtled straight toward her position, carving a line through the broken terrain as it came. The girl didn't even fully rise from her relaxed position. With a slight shift of her body, She moved out of its path with an ease that looked almost unnatural. She blinked once, then slowly turned her head, scanning the direction it had come from. "Who just threw that?" she asked, her tone still light but now carrying a hint of annoyance. Her gaze immediately locked onto movement in the distance. Yui was already advancing, closing the gap with steady speed while maintaining pressure. Without hesitation, Yui began her next phase. She scooped up scattered pebbles along her path, throwing them forward in rapid succession, each one expanding mid-flight as her quirk activated. The once small stones grew into large, heavy projectiles that filled the air with increasing pressure, forcing the battlefield itself to respond. The girl straightened slightly from her lounging position as she observed the incoming barrage, her expression shifting for the first time into something more focused, though still not fully serious. "Ah," she murmured, watching the enlarged stones approach. "So you're the one taking initiative now." She moved through the incoming barrage with a kind of effortless precision that defied the weight of her armored boots and gauntlets, each step carrying her just out of reach as enlarged projectiles slammed into the ruins around her and shattered into dust. Her body language remained loose, almost playful, as if she were dancing through the attacks rather than evading them seriously. Then she tapped the ground once. The battlefield responded instantly. A violent surge of earth erupted forward in a sweeping wave, racing across the broken terrain before crashing into Yui and locking her in place between jagged formations of stone. The impact pinned her movement, restricting her mobility as the ground held her down with unnatural control. "Silly girl," the opponent said with a grin, tilting her head slightly as she observed the situation. "Where's your teammate at? I won't give up." Yui's voice rang out immediately, strained but firm despite being immobilized. The girl's grin widened at that, amusement returning to her expression as she leaned forward slightly. "Oh, is that—" Her words cut off mid-sentence. A sudden blankness spread through her mind, like someone had pulled the thread of her thoughts out all at once. Her expression flickered for the first time, confusion breaking through her confidence as her body briefly stalled in place. Just behind Yui, partially concealed by a jagged slab of earth, Shinso remained crouched low. His voice changer was already adjusted, and his posture steady as he confirmed the response he had been waiting for. "Good thing I copied Kodai's voice," Shinso said quietly, his tone controlled as he maintained focus, confirming that his quirk had successfully taken hold. "All right, way to go." Tetsu shouted from the observation area, leaning forward with his fists clenched in excitement. "Shinso's really amazing," Uraraka said with a bright smile, watching the coordination between him and Yui unfold on the screen. "All they've got to do now is knock her out," Kaminari added, half relieved and half tense. Down below, Shinso carefully moved forward once the immobilizing earth began to loosen. He reached Yui and quickly helped free her from the remaining stone bindings, keeping his focus sharp in case of any sudden retaliation. "Great job out there," Shinso said quietly as he steadied her. His tone was calm, but firm. "Now we just need to finish this and knock her out." The moment those words left him, the ground beneath them trembled violently. A deep rumble spread through the ruins, far heavier than anything they had experienced so far. The earth split open with overwhelming force, and from it, a massive golem surged upward, towering over the battlefield. His body was formed entirely of reinforced stone and shifting earth, moving with deliberate strength as it immediately reached out and grabbed both Shinso and Yui in one swift motion. "What the heck is that thing?" Shinso struggled, his voice strained as he tried to break free, but the grip was too strong and too stable. Before either of them could react further, the golem shifted its massive hand slightly and gently tapped the side of the girl's head. Her expression immediately changed, the earlier confusion clearing as if nothing had happened. She blinked once, then sighed lightly. "Oh, thanks, Giga," she said with a soft smile, her tone completely different from before. "You're such a good boy." On the observation screen, the students froze as a new label and announcement appeared. Gura, the Earthquake. Rank, 20th. Ability, Earth Manipulation and Creation. "Bye-bye now, Fufufu," Gura said with a playful smirk, raising her hands slightly as if waving them off. The massive earth golem shifted its stance in response, lowering its center of gravity as its entire body coiled with unnatural precision. For a brief moment it resembled a pitcher winding up for a throw, the ruins beneath its feet cracking under the force of its motion. Then, with a sudden explosive release, it hurled Shinso and Yui through the air directly toward the observation platform. Before impact, Gentle Agent moved without hesitation. His coat flared slightly as he activated his quirk, the surface of the ground beneath the observation area becoming elastic and compressing like a spring. The moment Shinso and Yui hit, the surface absorbed their momentum and rebounded gently, preventing any serious injury while still sending a visible ripple through the structure. The two bounced once before landing in a controlled roll, coming to a stop near the edge of the viewing platform. For a brief moment, the entire observation area went quiet, the sheer force and coordination of what had just happened settling over everyone present. "And first match is over," Labrava announced, her voice cutting through the lingering silence over the observation area. A few seconds passed as the impact of the announcement sank in, students and pros alike still processing what they had just witnessed on the screen. Shinso and Yui were still catching their breath near the platform edge, both visibly shaken but unharmed thanks to Gentle's intervention. On the battlefield below, the ruins slowly settled back into stillness, the massive golem dissipating into the earth as Gura stood calmly in the center of it all, unbothered as ever. "Well then," Gentle said softly, adjusting his posture as the elastic ground beneath Shinso and Yui returned to normal. "That concludes the first demonstration." The atmosphere in the observation deck shifted almost immediately, tension mixing with awe. Some students were stunned into silence, others were already whispering excitedly, replaying every moment they had just seen. Aizawa's eyes remained fixed on the field, unreadable, while All Might stood quietly beside him, his expression thoughtful. Below, Labrava's cheerful energy returned as she looked toward the next match listings. "Next teams, please prepare." "Bummer, you guys lost," Uraraka said softly as Shinso and Yui finally made it back into the observation area, her tone gentle rather than teasing as she looked at them with concern. Shinso exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck as he steadied his breathing, still processing how quickly things had escalated at the end. "Yeah, we got thrown pretty hard at the end," he admitted, his voice low but controlled. Yui gave a small nod, glancing down for a moment before responding in her usual quiet tone. "We were read too easily at the end. That was my mistake." Around them, a few students were still glancing between the battlefield and the two of them, clearly impressed despite the result. The match had ended in defeat, but not without showing just how quickly things could turn against them when facing Zenith members. Kirishima scratched his head, trying to lighten the mood. "Still, you guys did pretty good for your first round against someone like that," he said with a grin. Shinso gave a small, tired exhale, not quite smiling but not discouraged either. "Yeah, we'll adjust next time," he muttered, eyes drifting back toward the field where the next match was already being prepared. "Oh look, Aoyama and Aways are up," Kendo said, nodding toward the screen as the next names lit up on the roster. Down on the field, the environment shifted again, the ruins dissolving as mechanical structures began rising from beneath the ground. Metal plates slid into place with precise, deliberate motion, assembling into a vast mechanized field filled with shifting platforms, conveyor-like sections, and segmented walls that clicked and locked into position like a massive automated system coming online. Aoyama and Aways stepped into the arena together, both pausing briefly as they took in the sudden change in terrain. Aways adjusted his stance, scanning the moving structures carefully. "Okay, this is definitely more complicated than the last one," he muttered, already thinking through possible applications of his quirk. Aoyama gave a dramatic flourish, striking a pose even in the face of the unfamiliar environment. "Fear not, Monami. We shall shine like the brightest stars upon this mechanical stage." Above them, the observation deck remained focused, anticipation building again as the next match was about to begin. The lingering shock from the previous fight hadn't fully faded, but attention was already shifting forward, toward whatever would throw at them. "Match 2 begin," Labrava announced, her voice ringing clearly through the mechanized arena. The instant the signal dropped, both Aoyama and Awaze tensed up, their earlier excitement replaced by sharp focus. Neither of them moved recklessly this time. Shinso and Yui's match was still fresh in everyone's mind, and they weren't about to repeat the same mistakes. Awaze crouched slightly, eyes scanning the shifting metal platforms as they began to reconfigure around them. "Stay alert," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "This place changes too fast to predict." Aoyama adjusted his stance, one hand near his belt, his usual flair toned down but still present in his posture. "We must illuminate the battlefield with caution and grace," he said, though even he sounded more serious than usual. The mechanical field responded almost immediately, segments sliding and rotating with rhythmic precision, creating new pathways and elevated structures that constantly altered sightlines and distance. A massive mechanical hammer suddenly slammed down between Aoyama and Awaze with brutal force, the impact sending a shockwave through the metal flooring as arcs of electromagnetic energy crackled across its surface. The sudden strike forced both of them to stagger back, their formation breaking instantly as they reacted to the unexpected assault. "What the?" Awaze started, eyes widening as he caught himself. Aoyama stumbled back a step, clutching his belt as he stared at the weapon lodged between them. "Monju!" he muttered under his breath, genuinely thrown off by the sudden escalation. The hammer didn't stay planted for long. It began to hum faintly, the electromagnetic charge pulsing before it lifted itself back into the air as if weightless, rotating once before being pulled back toward its owner. From the far side of the mechanized field, a figure stood waiting. A well-built guy, wearing a torn yellow shirt and a red futuristic triband strapped across his frame, caught the returning weapon effortlessly with practiced precision. His posture was steady, controlled, and clearly accustomed to heavy impact combat. He had slicked-back brown hair, sharp red eyes that carried a focused intensity, and a left arm replaced entirely by a high-grade robotic prosthetic that matched the design of his weapon's energy system. "Rumble punk!" the boy shouted, driving his hammer into the ground with explosive force. The instant metal met impact, a violent electromagnetic pulse rippled outward across the entire mechanized field. The air itself seemed to crackle as a visible wave of energy surged through the structures, racing along every platform, wall, and conduit like a living circuit being awakened all at once. One by one, the mechanical structures lit up in response. Panels glowed, platforms hummed to life, and the entire arena transformed into a fully energized battlefield. Moving parts that had been shifting passively before now responded with sharper speed and coordinated motion, as if the field itself had become synchronized with him. Awaze's eyes widened immediately. "He just activated the whole field?" he said, quickly stepping back as the platforms around them began to react more aggressively than before. Aoyama tightened his stance, his usual flair gone as he focused entirely on survival. "This is no ordinary control of machinery," he muttered, watching the energy surge flow through the arena like veins of lightning. On the observation deck, the reaction was immediate, students leaning forward as the scale of the ability became clear. "So this guy can manipulate technology?" "I see," Ryukyu remarked, her gaze steady as she analyzed the glowing battlefield below. "That kind of ability is extremely reliable in a controlled environment like this. Think those two can even stand a chance?" Fatgum asked, arms crossed as he watched the platforms shift more aggressively under Aoyama and Awaze's feet. "I believe they do," Night Eye replied calmly, eyes fixed on the screen as he calculated possibilities. Awaze can fuse objects together, and Aoyama's laser provides direct, high-output interference. If used correctly, they can disrupt his control over the field. Hawks gave a small smirk from the side, wings shifting slightly behind him. "Maybe," he said casually, eyes glinting with interest. "But I'm still betting on the robo guy." Down on the field, the mechanized arena continued to hum with energy, every movement now sharper, faster, and clearly under the opponent's influence as the next exchange loomed. "It's best you two surrender," the boy said coldly, tightening his grip on the hammer as his robotic arm hummed faintly with residual energy. "You don't stand a chance." "Fat chance." Aways snapped back immediately, refusing to back down despite the pressure building around them. Aoyama, shoot for his hammer now. As you wish, Aoyama replied with unusual focus, shifting his stance as he leaned forward. With a sharp twist of his torso, he unleashed his navel laser in a precise beam aimed directly at the weapon, the light cutting through the air with concentrated force. The beam struck the hammer cleanly, dispersing into bright fragments of light on impact. For a moment, it seemed like it might have worked, but as the glow faded, the opponent remained completely unmoved. He stood there untouched, the hammer still intact in his grip, a faint smirk forming on his face as if the attack had barely registered. Both Aoyama and Aways froze for a split second, disbelief setting in as they tried to understand what they were seeing. "How are you still standing?" Aways shouted, unable to hide his shock as he stared at the unscathed weapon and its wielder. The guy didn't answer. Instead, he raised his hammer slowly, the electromagnetic energy around it beginning to intensify again. Then, without hesitation, he swung it down with overwhelming force. The impact released a massive shockwave that tore across the battlefield, blasting both students off their feet and sending them flying several meters backward through the shifting mechanical terrain. They skidded to a stop among the moving platforms, momentarily stunned by the sheer power behind the strike. "Aoyama's laser couldn't even damage him," Momo said, her brows furrowing as she studied the footage more carefully. Her voice carried clear concern now, the earlier curiosity replaced by analysis. "How is that possible?" The screen shifted slightly as Labrava's system automatically highlighted the combatant's data, revealing his identity and classification. The battlefield view briefly overlaid text as the system registered what was being observed in real time. Kira, the Technivore. Brink, 19th. Ability: electromagnetic manipulation, metal creation, energy absorption and conversion. The description continued as the implications settled in. His body functioned like a living power converter, capable of absorbing virtually all forms of energy attacks and converting them into usable power, effectively making direct energy-based offense ineffective against him. Ryukyu's expression sharpened slightly as she read it. "So that's why the laser had no effect," she said calmly, her tone serious now. "It wasn't just durability. It was absorption." Fat Gum let out a low whistle. "That's a bad matchup for most ranged attackers." Night Eye adjusted his glasses slightly, eyes narrowing as he processed the information. "Energy-based attacks are not only ineffective," he said quietly, "they are actively beneficial to him if sustained. It seems I've made an error." On the screen, Aoyama and Aways were already trying to recover their footing, while Akira stood in control of the battlefield, the mechanized structures still pulsing faintly in sync with his presence like an extension of his own body. He raised his hammer high above his head, and the entire battlefield seemed to respond to the motion as electromagnetic energy began to converge around him in dense, visible currents. The mechanized field, already fully activated, started to resonate in sync with his presence, as if every metal surface had become part of his control network. Loose fragments of metal from shattered platforms and reinforced structures began to lift into the air one by one, drawn toward him like iron filings to a magnet. The pieces rotated and folded mid-flight, breaking down and reforming as they approached his left arm. His prosthetic hummed louder as the incoming metal fused directly into its frame, layer by layer, restructuring and reinforcing itself in real time. Plates interlocked, joints expanded, and raw material condensed into a denser, heavier form. The shape of the arm changed rapidly, growing larger with each second as more metal was absorbed and reconfigured. Within moments, the prosthetic was no longer just an arm. It had transformed into a colossal iron fist, massive in scale and reinforced beyond anything conventional, its surface still crackling faintly with stored electromagnetic energy. Akira lowered his stance slightly, testing the weight as the newly formed structure stabilized. The sheer presence of it altered the air around him, the field lights flickering subtly as residual energy continued to feed into his system like a closed loop. Across the arena, Aoyama and Aways stared up at the transformation, the scale of it making the earlier attacks feel insignificant in comparison as the fight escalated into something far more overwhelming. Then, with a sudden burst of power from his reinforced frame and the electromagnetic field beneath him, Akira launched himself high into the air. The jump wasn't just physical strength alone, it was assisted by controlled energy repulsion, sending him soaring upward as his massive iron fist rotated slightly, locking onto its targets below. From that height, his gaze immediately found Aoyama and Awase, both still recovering their footing among the shifting mechanical platforms. The system around him stabilized in an instant, calculations aligning with precision as he focused his descent. "Target locked," he said flatly, voice calm despite the overwhelming force building around him. Then he began his descent. The iron fist came down like a falling meteor, cutting through the air with increasing speed as gravity and electromagnetic acceleration combined. The ground beneath him seemed to warp under the pressure, the mechanical field reacting violently as warning signals flickered across its structures. Aoyama looked up first, eyes widening as the sheer size of the incoming strike filled his vision. Awase reacted a split second later, stepping back instinctively as both realized there was no time to fully escape the impact zone. The fist crashed downward with devastating force, aimed directly at their position, threatening to engulf them in a single overwhelming blow as the entire battlefield trembled under the impact trajectory. As the dust slowly settled across the mechanized field, the aftermath came into view. Broken metal fragments lay scattered in every direction, the once active structures now dimming as residual energy faded from Akira's control. At the center of the impact zone, Akira stood firmly, his posture steady despite the destruction around him. His massive iron fist had collapsed back into scattered components, the overclocked mass no longer sustaining its form after the attack. One of his arms was now gone entirely, reduced back into unusable fragments of metal that lay strewn across the ground. A few meters away, Aoyama and Awase lay unconscious amid the debris, the force of the strike having overwhelmed their ability to continue. The battlefield had gone quiet again, the intensity of the clash leaving a noticeable stillness in its wake. Akira glanced at his empty shoulder, tilting his head slightly as he processed the result of his own attack. "Huh," he muttered, his tone casual despite the outcome. "Guess I went overboard." He shifted his stance slightly, then sighed as he looked down at the broken metal around him. "Dang it," he added, almost disappointed rather than angry. "That was my favorite arm." Chapter 4, Beatdown, Part 2. "So, do you have a strategy or something?" Tsuburaba asked, his voice a little tighter than usual as he looked around the field. The environment had shifted again. What once had been a mechanized battlefield was now something entirely different. The ground was uneven, cracked stones stretching out in all directions, broken headstones scattered across the area, some half sunken into the earth. Dead trees twisted upward like skeletal hands, their branches creaking softly as the wind passed through them. A faint fog clung low to the ground, limiting visibility just enough to make every shadow feel uncertain. Koda walked beside him, quiet as always, his eyes moving slowly across the graveyard. Small animals were already beginning to gather, birds perched along the crooked branches, tiny creatures peeking out from behind stones as if responding to his presence. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he crouched slightly, placing a gentle hand near the ground as if listening. "We shouldn't rush," Koda finally said in his soft, hesitant voice. "This place, it's full of hiding spots." Tsuburaba rubbed the back of his head, glancing around again as the fog shifted slightly. "Yeah, I figured as much," he admitted. "Doesn't exactly scream, charge in headfirst." Koda nodded faintly, then looked toward one of the darker sections of the graveyard where the fog seemed thicker. "I can ask them," he added quietly. A few birds fluttered their wings in response, and something small scurried across a nearby gravestone. Tsuburaba blinked, then gave a small grin despite the eerie setting. "Right, you've got scouts," he said. "That actually helps a lot." The two of them slowed their pace slightly, stepping carefully through the graveyard as they prepared themselves. "I really hope those two make it out unscathed," Komori said softly, her hands clasped together as she watched the graveyard field on the screen. They'll both be fine, Vlad replied, though his voice carried a slight hesitation as he kept his eyes on the match. Right? Gentle Agent stood with his usual composed posture, gaze steady as he observed the shifting shadows within the graveyard. When he spoke, his tone was calm, but carried a weight that made the students listen more carefully. It depends, he said, folding his hands behind his back, on whether they can endure. A few of the students glanced at him, the answer not quite as reassuring as they had hoped. The purpose of this exercise, Gentle continued, is not victory. It is to confront a level of force far beyond your current capabilities and learn from it. His eyes remained fixed on the field below, where Koda and Tsubaraba moved cautiously through the fog. Whether they win or lose is secondary, he added quietly. What matters is what they take from the experience. The observation area fell into a more thoughtful silence after that, the excitement of earlier matches now tempered by the reality of what Zenith was truly putting them through. Oh my, whatever you all are discussing here? A new voice slipped into the observation area, light and easygoing, immediately drawing attention. A girl stepped forward, dressed in dark green wanderer's clothing with layered fabrics that moved naturally with her stride. A wide-brimmed hat shaded part of her face, and long brown bangs draped over her left eye, leaving only her forest green gaze clearly visible. A red accent on her hat stood out against the muted tones of her outfit, giving her a subtle but distinct presence. She tilted her head slightly, curiosity flickering in her visible eye as she looked past the group toward the large screen displaying the graveyard field. Ah, dear Robin, Gentle greeted smoothly, turning toward her with a polite nod. You've arrived just in time to see dear Reika take the field. Is that so? Robin replied, her tone thoughtful as she watched the screen more closely. I do hope whoever's facing her isn't too jumpy. She tends to mess with people's nerves. Only then did she shift her attention toward the gathered students and pro-heroes. She gave a small, relaxed smile, lifting a hand in casual greeting. Oh, greetings, visitors. Nice to meet you. The students responded almost in unison, a mix of politeness and curiosity in their voices as they took in yet another unfamiliar but clearly powerful presence. Hey there, Missy, Fat Gum said with his usual friendly tone, giving her a casual wave. You must be one of Zenith's members. I mean, of course you are. Robin let out a small, amused breath at that, her visible eye narrowing slightly with a hint of humor. Well, you've got me there, she said lightly, glancing back at the screen as the graveyard match continued to unfold. Name's Robin. I'm not the one fighting today though, so you can relax. For now. I knew I recognized that aloof tone, Hawks said, a smirk tugging at his lips as he glanced over at her. Nice seeing you again, BB. Back at you, Cox, Robin replied without missing a beat, her voice carrying that same relaxed, teasing edge as she tipped her hat slightly. Oh, you guys know each other? Fat Gum asked, blinking between them in surprise. You didn't tell us you knew one of them, Aizawa added, his gaze narrowing slightly as he looked at Hawks. Hawks just shrugged, slipping his hands into his pockets like it was nothing worth explaining in detail. Ran into her a while back, he said casually. We're birds of a feather. Nijire's eyes lit up immediately at that. She leaned forward a bit, clearly intrigued. Oh, so does that mean you have some kind of bird-related ability? She asked, her voice bubbling with curiosity. Do you transform into a robin? Because your name's Robin. Robin paused for a second, then let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head slightly. Not quite, she said, her tone easygoing as she glanced back toward the screen. Name's just a name. Her visible eye shifted back to the graveyard field, her expression sharpening just a bit as the match continued. But if you're expecting something simple like that, she added, voice lowering slightly with a hint of amusement, you might be disappointed. Or shocked. Before anyone could dwell on Robin's words, a loud crash thundered through the observation area. Heads snapped toward the screen at once. What they saw made the entire deck go still. In the graveyard field, Koda and Tsubaraba had already been defeated. Both were immobilized where they stood, pinned by hardened dirt and cement that had risen around their bodies like restraints. They struggled, but neither could move more than a few inches. Around them, chunks of broken stone, cracked grave markers, and scattered debris floated weightlessly in the air as if gravity itself no longer applied. Hovering above the battlefield with eerie stillness was their opponent. She was a fairly fit girl with short white hair that framed a pale face marked by sharp blood-red eyes. A half-black mask covered the left side of her face, giving her an even more unsettling presence. Her long black coat, lined with white fluffs at the collar and cuffs, drifted gently despite the lack of wind, making her seem less like a person and more like an apparition suspended above the graveyard. The display identified her immediately. Reika the Wraith Veil. Ability: she has the powers of a ghost, such as intangibility, telekinesis, and illusions. A heavy silence settled over the observation deck as everyone absorbed the implications. Momo's expression sharpened, her mind already dissecting the matchup. So she can bypass physical defenses entirely, she said quietly, eyes fixed on the screen. Kendo exhaled slowly, arms crossing tighter. That's a nightmare opponent for close-range fighters. Even some of the pros remained silent. There was no flashy exchange, no drawn-out struggle. The fight had simply ended before most of them could process it. On screen, Reika slowly turned in the air, her coat swaying as the floating debris settled behind her like obedient shadows. She looked completely unbothered. Then Labrava's energetic voice broke the tension through the comms. Third round is over. Next team, prepare. Ow, ow, ow. Koda grunted softly as he and Tsubaraba made their way back into the observation area, both of them sore, dusty, and visibly shaken from how quickly the match had ended. Tsubaraba rubbed the side of his shoulder with a wince, his usual confidence dulled by the experience. Man, that was messed up, he muttered, glancing back at the screen as if still trying to understand what had happened. I couldn't even tell what was real half the time. Koda gave a slow nod, still stiff from being restrained in hardened earth. A few small birds fluttered around him worriedly before settling on the nearby railing. Komori hurried closer, concern all over her face. You two okay? She asked quickly. We're fine, Tsubaraba answered first, though the soreness in his voice betrayed him. Just humbled. A few students let out nervous laughs at that, but crossed his arms and gave them an approving nod despite the loss. You got caught fast, but you stayed composed longer than most would in that kind of environment. Koda looked down for a moment, then quietly added, couldn't hear the animals clearly. Too many false sounds. That made several students pause. Momo's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. So her illusions interfere with perception on multiple levels. She said under her breath. Gentle placed a hand to his chest with a solemn expression. Reika enjoys confusion more than violence, he explained calmly. If your senses fail you, the match is already decided. Tsubaraba sighed dramatically and slumped onto a bench. Great. We got haunted for educational purposes. And it was by someone who looks like Reiko's long-lost sister. That drew a few relieved chuckles, easing some of the tension as the next team prepared. Hey, Ms. Robin, Kaminari said, turning toward her with renewed interest. Are you going to fight next? Not quite, Robin replied as she suddenly shifted into an exaggerated, edgy stance, one hand to the brim of her hat and the other angled behind her like a wandering hero from a dramatic poster. I will come much later, dear comrade. Kaminari blinked twice. Why did that sound kinda cool? He asked aloud. Jairu immediately rolled her eyes. Because you're easy to impress. Robin dropped the pose just as quickly as she had entered it, shoulders loosening as she gave a casual shrug. Timing matters, she said like she hadn't done anything strange at all. Can't show up too early. Ruins the mystique. Hawks let out a quiet snort from the side. Still as dramatic as ever. Robin tipped her hat without even looking at him. And you're still jealous of my presence. Nijire leaned forward, eyes sparkling with curiosity. Wait, so if you come later, does that mean you're stronger than the others? Or just busier? Or are you one of those surprise final bosses? Robin's smile widened faintly. She slipped into another theatrical pose, cloak shifting behind her. Maybe yes, she said smoothly. Maybe no. Maybe I just enjoy making entrances. Oh, she's just a tryhard, Monoma said with a scoff, folding his arms. Hey, don't be rude, Kendo snapped immediately, chopping him lightly on the shoulder before turning away. Anyways, Kaibara, I think you and Jairu are up. Kaibara straightened at once, cracking his neck slightly as he prepared himself. Welp, wish us luck, guys, Jairu said, already walking toward the field as she grabbed the drill-haired boy by the sleeve and dragged him along with her. Behind them, the observation deck shifted its attention back to the screen as the next battlefield began to transform once more. As Jairu and Kaibara stepped onto the battlefield, the environment shifted once again. The entire field flattened into a vast tiled arena. Smooth square panels stretched in every direction, clean and level, with no cover, no obstacles, and no terrain advantages too. It was an open expanse of pale stone-like tiles laid out in perfect symmetry, so pristine that it almost felt unnatural after the chaos of the previous matches. Jairu slowed slightly as she looked around, one brow lifting in suspicion. Her hands rested near her earphone jacks as she scanned the empty space. That's it? She asked. No traps? No creepy stuff? Just floor? Kaibara lowered himself into a ready stance, eyes sweeping the area carefully despite the plain appearance. Don't lower your guard, he said firmly. If they made it this simple, there's probably a reason. From the observation deck, several students shared the same concern. That's way too normal, Shota said immediately, narrowing his eyes at the screen. I don't trust it. Momo gave a small nod, arms folded as she analyzed the setup. An empty battlefield can be just as dangerous as a complicated one, she said. It removes distractions and emphasizes direct combat advantages. Aizawa remained silent, but his gaze sharpened slightly. He understood the same thing everyone else was beginning to realize. A battlefield with nothing to hide behind meant one thing. Whoever their opponent was probably didn't need cover at all. Jiro duck! Kaibara yelled, reacting before she could even process what was happening as he shoved her sharply out of the way. A split second later, a semi-transparent blue fist tore through the air where her head had just been, distorting the space around it as it passed and slamming into the tiled ground behind them with a dull, energy-laced impact. What was that? Jairu snapped, whipping her head around in alarm as she tried to locate the source. I couldn't even hear it coming. Before either of them could reposition properly, a second strike launched forward, faster and more direct, aimed squarely at Kaibara. He barely had time to react. Crossing his arms in front of his body, he braced himself and took the hit head-on. The moment it connected, a sharp, unfamiliar pressure surged through him, like compressed energy forcing its way through his guard. His stance slid back slightly across the smooth tiles from the force alone. Dude, you okay? Jairu called out immediately, rushing toward him with concern as she quickly checked his arms for damage. Kaibara grimaced but stayed upright, flexing his fingers once to confirm he still had control. Yeah, I'm fine, he said through his teeth, though his stance tightened as he reset his footing. A shadow suddenly stretched across the polished tiles in front of them, cutting off the light between them and the open field. Stand ready for my arrival, newbies. A figure had stepped into view, standing directly before them without any sign of movement or transition from distance to close range. He was a muscular guy dressed in a black skin-tight bodysuit with matching undergarments, his frame built for raw power and precision. His short brown hair was slicked back neatly, and his black eyes carried a sharp, almost predatory excitement as he studied them like targets he had already evaluated. The air around him felt heavier, not from intimidation alone, but from the lingering pressure of the invisible attacks he had already launched. Damn it! Jairu muttered, quickly snapping her earphone jacks into position as she aimed directly at the muscular teen and released a concentrated sonic blast, the sound wave tearing across the tiled arena with controlled force and precision. The attack struck him cleanly, but instead of impact or resistance, his entire body fractured into fading blue energy, dispersing like a hologram breaking apart under pressure. What the? Jairu barely had time to process what she was seeing before her instincts screamed at her to move. In an instant, without any visible transition or movement through space, the same man reappeared directly behind her, standing far too close for comfort as if he had always been there. "Jiro!" Kaibara shouted immediately, reacting on instinct as he pivoted and launched a spinning strike toward the new position of their opponent, his movement sharp and committed. But just like before, the moment his attack connected, the man's body dissolved again into that same faint, unstable energy, dispersing harmlessly as if the strike had hit nothing at all. Kaibara landed from his rotation with a tense skid across the ground, eyes widening slightly as he realized the pattern was repeating, while Jiro quickly repositioned beside him, both of them now fully on alert as they tried to understand what kind of ability allowed him to appear and vanish without any trace of movement in between. Before either Jiro or Kaibara could recover their footing, the arena filled with a sudden pressure change, like the air itself had been compressed around them. A massive semi-transparent blue palm materialized overhead without warning and slammed them both straight into the tiled ground with crushing force, the impact sending a ripple through the perfectly flat battlefield as cracks spidered outward from the point of contact. For a brief moment, everything went still except for the faint hum of energy dispersing from the impact zone. "Is that really all you're both capable of?" the same voice said calmly. The energy distortion above them stabilized, and the figure reformed directly in front of them once again, standing perfectly still as if nothing had happened. His expression carried no excitement now, only a quiet, disappointed assessment. "I'm not impressed." On the observation deck, several students stiffened as the identification data appeared on screen, revealing the full classification of the opponent they were facing. Jack the Avatar. Brink. 17th. Ability: he can create semi-transparent energy projections of himself or other separate body parts for offensive and mobility use. Momo's eyes narrowed slightly as she processed the implications. So he can essentially exist in multiple places at once through projections, she said quietly. Kendo exhaled slowly. That explains why their attacks never connect properly, they're never actually hitting the real body. Down on the field, Jiro groaned as she pushed herself up slightly from the impact while Kaibara steadied himself beside her, both of them now clearly realizing they were dealing with an opponent who could appear, disappear, and strike from any direction without committing to a single position. "You know, the last 3 fights got me thinking," Jack said casually, rolling his shoulders as if the previous exchanges had barely warmed him up. He lifted both wrists slightly, revealing the heavy metal guards strapped around them. "Even with these weight bracelets on," he continued, tapping them once with a faint metallic clink, "you guys still couldn't handle us." A slow grin spread across his face, sharp and confident. "So I'm not even gonna use my power on you." On the observation deck, the mood shifted immediately. "That's reckless," Night Eye said sharply, eyes narrowing behind his glasses as he analyzed the decision. "He's deliberately handicapping himself. Overconfidence will be his downfall if he misjudges their adaptability." Fat Gum crossed his arms, watching the screen with a more measured expression. "I don't know," he said after a moment. "He still looks like he could handle himself even without it. That kind of confidence usually comes from experience, not arrogance." Meanwhile, Mineta practically shot up from his seat. "Wait, all this time, these guys have been wearing weights the entire time?" he shouted, pointing at the screen in disbelief. A few students reacted similarly, murmuring among themselves as they processed the implications of what they had just learned. Below, Jack remained relaxed in the center of the field, his attention still fixed on Jiro and Kaibara as the battlefield stayed unnaturally quiet for a moment, the tension building again before the next exchange. "All right, come at me," Jack said as he shifted into a fighting stance that looked almost unfamiliar, not matching any standard martial form the students had been taught. His posture was loose yet perfectly balanced, like he was waiting to react rather than initiate, but the pressure in the air around him made it clear he was anything but passive. Across the tiled arena, Jiro and Kaibara steadied themselves, both adjusting their footing on the smooth surface as they prepared for another exchange. Jiro's expression hardened with focus while Kaibara lowered his center of gravity, both of them sinking into a more coordinated stance after the previous exchanges had forced them to adapt quickly. You'll regret underestimating us, Kaibara said firmly, his eyes locked on Jack without wavering. Yeah, Gyro added, gripping her gear more tightly as she positioned herself slightly to the side to create an angle of attack. We've been training to be heroes and fighting villains. There's no way we're letting you off. Easy. Jack remained still for a moment, silently observing them. His gaze shifted between the two, analyzing their posture, their timing, and the subtle differences in how they carried their intent. After a brief pause, he exhaled softly, almost like he was disappointed but not surprised. All right, he said simply. Moments of so-called Quirkless supremacy later, Jack stood in the center of the tiled arena casually picking his teeth with a small motion of his finger, completely unbothered as if the match had been nothing more than a warm-up. Behind him, Gyro and Kaibara lay unconscious among the smooth stone panels, the aftermath of the exchange leaving no doubt about the result. On the observation deck, the silence was heavier this time. Momo's expression tightened as she carefully replayed what she had seen in her mind, her analytical focus unable to ignore the speed at which their coordination had collapsed. They couldn't even establish rhythm, she said quietly, almost to herself, as she tried to identify where their structure had broken down. Kirishima frowned deeply, his arms crossed as he stared at the screen. Man, he didn't even look like he was trying that hard, he muttered, clearly unsettled by how effortless it had seemed from start to finish. Kendo exhaled slowly, her eyes still fixed on the field. That's the problem, she said after a moment. He wasn't. Near them, Night Eye adjusted his glasses, his usual composure visibly shaken as he processed the implications of the fight. He was engaging in combat without using his quirk, he said sharply, disbelief creeping into his tone. No support gear, no visible enhancement, how is that level of control even possible? I guess you're wrong once again, Ryukyu stated calmly, her gaze still on the battlefield as she spoke without hesitation. Before anyone could respond further, Labrava's voice echoed across the observation area, cutting through the tension like a reset signal. Fourth match concluded. Gyro and Kaibara soon returned from the deck area, both clearly worn down and showing signs of the match's intensity. Gyro rubbed her shoulder with a wince while Kaibara kept a hand near his side, breathing steadily but heavily as they rejoined the group. You guys okay? Tetsu asked immediately, leaning forward with concern. Does it look like we are? Gyro muttered dryly, exhaling through her teeth as she shifted her weight. Ouch! Before anyone could respond further, Labrava stepped forward again, raising her voice to continue the proceedings. All right, everyone, it's time for the next teams to preppa. Her announcement was abruptly cut off as a sharp comm signal echoed across the entire facility. Attention, all Zenith fighters and agents, please report to the conference hall. I repeat, please report to the conference hall, a female voice announced clearly over the speakers. A brief silence followed as confusion spread across the observation area. Students and pros alike exchanged glances, trying to understand the sudden interruption. Robin, who had been leaning casually nearby, straightened slightly as if the message had been expected. With a dramatic flourish, she struck another exaggerated pose, though this time it felt more like habit than performance. My dear, she said, tone light and almost theatrical, and here I was hoping to engage in battle with you heroes. She lowered her arms and gave a small shrug, turning away. But it seems the matches will be cancelled for now. Gentle Agent followed her lead without hesitation, adjusting his posture as he began walking toward the exit. Come along, Labrava, he said calmly. Coming. Labrava responded quickly, turning back toward the group with a polite wave. You folks take over from here, okay? And just like that, the three of them left the observation area, leaving the heroes and students in silence as the sudden interruption brought the training exercise to an unexpected pause. What do you think is going on? Fatgum whispered, leaning slightly toward Ryukyu as the group began to move. I don't really know, Ryukyu replied, tilting her head as she watched the direction Robin and Gentle had left. But it seems important. The kind of thing that overrides scheduled activity without hesitation. All Might stood a little apart from the others, his gaze fixed toward the distance. Robin's usual theatrical demeanor had been there, But he had noticed something else beneath it, urgency that didn't quite match the performance. Gentle and La Brava too, both moving with purpose rather than ceremony. He stayed quiet, but his expression grew more serious. "All right," Vlad finally said, breaking the tension, "let's return to the dorms immediately. This appears to be a serious matter." Aizawa gave a short nod, already turning. "Let's move along." Without further argument, the group began heading back together, the earlier energy of the training grounds replaced with a quieter, more uncertain atmosphere. "Dang it," Kirishima muttered as they walked, hands behind his head. "I didn't even get to fight one of them." "Yeah, man, that's a bummer," Tetsu replied, sounding just as disappointed but still trying to shrug it off. "Oh, shut up you guys." Mineta grumbled from behind them, clearly annoyed by their complaining. Despite the casual words, there was a lingering tension in the air as everyone processed the abrupt cancellation, each of them wondering the same thing but not yet saying it out loud. At the backside of the island, the atmosphere felt noticeably different from the training grounds. The path leading toward the place they were heading was quieter, lined with trimmed greenery and structured stone walkways that contrasted the intensity of the combat areas. Robin, Gentle, and La Brava moved together at a steady pace when they were met by Izuku stepping out from a nearby building marked Kinder. The moment Gentle noticed him, his expression softened. Slightly. "Oh, greetings, dear Izuku," Gentle said politely, adjusting his posture with his usual composed manner. "How is little Eri doing?" Izuku naturally fell into step beside them as they continued walking toward the tall central tower. His expression relaxed a little at the question. "She's been doing good," Izuku replied honestly. "She's been getting along with the other kids more and more." La Brava gave a small, approving nod as she listened. "That is good to hear," she said gently. "Stability is important for recovery." Izuku nodded slightly at that before shifting his attention forward, curiosity returning to his expression. "Yeah, anyways," he continued, glancing between them. "Do you guys know what's going on? Everyone suddenly got called in." Robin tilted her head slightly, tapping her cheek as if thinking. "Not quite sure," she said in a light tone. "But..." She looked ahead toward the tower doors, where several Zenith personnel were already beginning to gather. "Let's not keep them waiting." Chapter 5. Adjustments. "Aw man, we didn't even get a chance to fight them." Tetsu groaned, slouched deep into the couch in the common room like all strength had left his body. "I know," Kirishima added from nearby, shaking his head in disappointment. "The rest of you guys were so lucky." "I'm going to pretend you two didn't just say that," Aways replied flatly, still sore from his own match as he sat with an ice pack pressed to his side. "For once, I'm relieved I didn't have to face those guys," Hagakure said, her voice carrying a visible shiver even if she herself could not be seen. "Seriously, Shinso, Kodai, Aoyama, Aways, Koda, Tsubaraba, Jairu, and Kaibara all got flattened." A few students laughed weakly, but the humor didn't last long. Even through the joking, no one could deny what they had witnessed that day. Every Zenith member they had seen so far had completely controlled their matches in a different way. None of them relied on the same style, and each one had displayed power, precision, and combat experience far beyond what most first-year hero students were used to facing. "I still can't get over Jairu and Kaibara's match," Yanagi said quietly, floating slightly above her seat as she spoke. That Jack guy's self-projection ability was terrifyingly strong. She paused, eyes narrowing as she recalled the battle. And then he chose to keep fighting powerless anyway. That statement drew the room into thoughtful silence again. Several students remembered it clearly now, how even after showing a strange and dangerous ability, he had abandoned the advantage and continued with nothing but raw skill and confidence. "They're not just strong," Momo said at last, seated upright with her hands folded in thought. "They know exactly how to use their strength." "And that's the scary part," Jairu muttered from across the room, still sore but listening. "None of them looked like they were trying that hard. At least we all know some of them," Kendo said, leaning back slightly as she tried to ease the lingering tension in the room. First was Gura the Earthquake, Kodai's cheerful lookalike. Momo nodded in agreement, her expression thoughtful as she recalled the match. Yes, she said calmly. Her abilities involve creating and manipulating Earth at a high level, including large-scale constructs and battlefield shaping. A few students murmured quietly at that, still remembering how easily the terrain had been controlled and weaponized. Kirishima crossed his arms, frowning slightly as he replayed the moment in his head. Yeah, she didn't even look like she was trying that hard either. That's what makes it worse, Awaze added from the side, still a bit stiff. She was just messing around and still had full control of the field. Kendo nodded once, continuing the thought. Then there was Akira, she said, her tone lowering slightly as she shifted topics. The Technivore. He basically turned the entire field into his weapon system. That guy was insane, Kaminari muttered quietly. He just turned everything into a giant electromagnet and turned his arm into a hammer the size of a building. Shota folded his arms, visibly uneasy. And he absorbed Aoyama's laser like it was nothing. That means most ranged attacks wouldn't work on him at all. The room went quiet for a moment as that sank in again. Then we have Reika the Wraith Veil, Momo continued, keeping her tone steady as she organized the information they had gathered so far. Yeah, the ghost girl, Komori muttered, hugging her arms slightly. She's like an older Yanagi. It's not just that, Hananuki added, leaning forward a bit as he thought it through more carefully. Even their names are basically the same. Just swap an O for an A. A few students blinked at that realization, then slowly started processing the coincidence. That's actually kind of funny when you think about it, Kaminari said, scratching his head with a small grin. Hey, she might as well be your long-lost older sister, Yanagi. Yanagi tilted her head slightly at that, floating just a bit higher as her usual calm expression remained unchanged. That would be statistically unlikely, she said quietly. But not impossible. Komori let out a small laugh despite herself. Please don't manifest that kind of coincidence, she said, still half shivering at the memory of Reika's match. Kendo crossed her arms, bringing the focus back. Jokes aside, her quirk is no laughing matter, she said seriously. Intangibility alone is already dangerous, but combining it with illusions and telekinesis makes her extremely unpredictable. Momo nodded. She can control perception and positioning simultaneously, she added. Even if you land an attack, there's no guarantee she's fully there. The room quieted again as the weight of that settled in, the earlier humor fading as they all remembered how quickly that match had ended. The most questionable one during these matches of course was Jack the Avatar, Tokage said, leaning back slightly as she recalled the earlier fights. The ability to create semi-transparent projections of himself, or even individual body parts made of energy, is a very versatile and dangerous quirk. Yet he deliberately chose not to use it against Jairu and Kaibara, Kendo added, arms crossed as she thought it through again. Maybe he was trying to prove a point? What kind of point is that supposed to be? Kaminari asked, frowning slightly. I'm not entirely sure what his intent was, Ida replied, adjusting his glasses with a serious tone. But I don't interpret it as something supportive or encouraging in nature. I think. Shishida spoke up slowly, his deeper voice drawing attention. He wanted to show us that even without powers, they are still immovable beasts. A brief silence followed that statement, as several students replayed the match in their minds. I still feel his single punch in my stomach, Kaibara murmured, sitting slightly hunched as if remembering the impact. Yeah, Jairu added quietly, rubbing her side. He was like a mini All Might. That comparison alone made a few of the others go quiet again, the weight of it settling in. Then finally, we have Ms. Robin, Tokage continued, shifting the topic deliberately. We haven't seen her in battle yet, so her abilities are still a total mystery. I still think she has bird powers, Mina said immediately, leaning forward with enthusiasm. Yeah, Ciro agreed. Didn't Hawk say they were birds of a feather, or something? A few students nodded at that, though the uncertainty remained. Kendo exhaled softly. With everything we've seen so far, she said, I don't think we should assume anything about her. Momo nodded in agreement. At this point, every Zenith member has defied simple classification, she added. It's safer to expect the unexpected. Oh, she's 100% a bird, all right. The sudden voice at the doorway made several students turn at once. Hawks stepped casually into the common room, hands in his pockets, looking far too relaxed for someone who had clearly been listening in. Kaminari nearly jumped upright. Whoa! How long were you standing there? Long enough, Hawks replied lazily as he walked further inside. You guys really do love speculating, huh? Mina leaned forward immediately, eyes sparkling with excitement. Wait, so she does have bird powers? Yeah, Hawks confirmed without hesitation. Though unlike the others you've all seen, she only uses a glimpse of it. A glimpse? Momo repeated, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Meaning she intentionally restrains her abilities? Ida straightened at once, posture sharp. If she limits herself voluntarily, then for what purpose? Tactical DSPLN? Personal code? Psychological effect? Hawk's easygoing demeanor faded slightly. His expression sharpened just enough for the room to notice. Trust me on this, kiddos, he said seriously. Just a glimpse is enough for her to take down an army. He paused, then added with a faint smirk. Same way I was the youngest hero to make it past the top 5. That statement hit the room hard. Even those who didn't closely follow hero rankings understood the weight behind it. Hawks wasn't someone who exaggerated strength casually. Kirishima blinked several times. Wait, hold on, he said slowly. You're saying she's that dangerous? I haven't seen her go all out, Hawks admitted, leaning against the wall now. But when she explained the true nature of her abilities to me, his eyes drifted slightly, recalling the conversation. She was dead serious. Silence settled across the room. Even after everything they had seen today, the idea that one of Zenith's members had yet another level beyond what was shown made the entire group uneasy. Tokage let out a low whistle. Great, she muttered. So the dramatic cosplayer lady might be a walking disaster. Correction, Momo said quietly, still thinking through the implications. A controlled disaster. Seriously, she's that dangerous with a bird ability? Mineta asked, leaning forward with a mix of disbelief and curiosity. More dangerous than those other guys? The room stayed quiet for a moment, the earlier confidence from the students starting to fade as they tried to reconcile what they had seen from Zenith so far with what they were being told now. I don't know if I should be telling you kids this, Hawks said after a brief pause, scratching the back of his head, but I feel like I might as well. That alone made a few students tense up slightly. She's one of the 5 behemoths of Zenith. The 5 behemoths? Ida repeated carefully, adjusting his glasses as he processed the term. That sounds like a designated elite classification within their internal structure. Yeah, Hawks confirmed casually. Top 3 to 7 strongest members in the group, depending on how you rank them. That clarification didn't exactly make things clearer. It just made the scale of Zenith feel even larger than before. Aizawa had appeared quietly near the entrance with the other pro heroes, having caught the latter half of the conversation. His gaze was sharp, immediately locking onto Hawks. How do you know all this, Hawks? Aizawa asked bluntly. I too am curious, Night Eye added, his tone precise as always, eyes narrowing slightly. Hawks let out a light breath, glancing between them before shrugging. Well, he said, far too casually for the content of his answer, me and Robin sometimes go on patrol together. That earned a few immediate reactions from the room. And we share some personal information, he added, as if that explained everything. I thought you guys only interacted once, Fatgum said, clearly thrown off as he looked between Hawks and Robin. Hawks waved a hand lightly, as if brushing off the assumption. That's the official version, yeah, he replied. But in this line of work, once doesn't always mean once. Aizawa's gaze sharpened slightly. Meaning you've had repeated contact outside official channels, he stated flatly. Hawks gave a small, non-committal shrug. Call it what you want. Patrol overlap, information exchange, occasional coordination, depends on the situation. Night Eye's expression tightened as he processed that. So Zenith maintains informal contact with active pro heroes at a personal level, he said. That suggests a level of integration far beyond a simple training facility. Momo frowned slightly. Then Robin's rank as a behemoth is not just symbolic, she added. It reflects actual operational authority. Kaminari leaned back slowly. So, we're just casually training on an island where one of the strongest people in the world is chilling in the background? Pretty much, Ciro muttered. Hawks exhaled lightly, his tone turning more serious again. Look, he said, glancing toward the hallway Robin had gone down earlier, don't overthink everything you hear. Zenith operates differently. Not everything is meant to be understood right away. Aizawa didn't respond immediately, his eyes narrowing slightly as he considered that. Still, Fatgum said after a moment, trying to ease the tension with a nervous laugh, that's a lot of information to drop on us at once, Hawks. Hawks smirked faintly. You're welcome. Hey wait, Shota spoke up, frowning as he tried to connect the missing pieces. You said top 3 to 7. Who are the top 2? The room shifted almost instantly. The question hung in the air longer than expected, like something no one really wanted to say out loud. Hawks exhaled slowly, his usual light tone fading a bit. I don't know, he admitted. I asked her once. A few students glanced at each other, surprised he was actually answering so directly. But she was pretty desperate to avoid the topic, Hawks continued. Not evasive like she was hiding a secret for pride. More like she didn't want to remember it. His gaze drifted slightly toward the window, as if replaying the conversation in his head. Of course, he added with a faint shrug, I'm not the type to back down easily. That earned him a couple of uneasy looks. Only thing she ever said about those two, Hawks said, voice lowering just a touch, was that they hate how the hero system and society treat them. Silence settled over the room. No jokes, no interruptions. Even Mineta didn't speak this time. The weight of that statement lingered heavily, especially after everything they had seen from these powerhouses so far. Ryukyu finally broke the silence, her voice calm but thoughtful. I guess that's why those two didn't want to participate in the matches, she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Aizawa's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly as he considered that possibility. Could be, he said quietly. The implication wasn't comforting. If the members they had seen were already this overwhelming, then the ones who refused to appear at all felt even more dangerous by comparison. I'm going, Aizawa said immediately, already turning toward the exit without waiting for further discussion. Wait where? Fatgum asked, pushing himself up slightly from his seat as he followed Aizawa with his eyes. To their meeting, Aizawa answered flatly, not slowing his pace. I want to know what's going on there. That got a reaction from the room. A few students straightened instinctively, while the pro-heroes exchanged quick glances. Hold on, Vlad said, stepping forward. That's not something you can just walk into without context. Aizawa stopped briefly at the doorway, his capture scarf shifting slightly as he glanced back. Context isn't going to appear on its own, he replied. Something significant enough to cancel their entire operation just happened. Sitting here won't explain it. Hawks pushed off the wall, watching him closely now. You're not wrong, he admitted, but walking straight into their conference room without knowing what's happening on their side is still a gamble. Night Eye adjusted his glasses, his expression tense but controlled. If Zenith is consolidating all members, then this is likely a coordinated internal incident, he said. Interference could escalate the situation. Aizawa's gaze didn't waver. Then I'll assess it before it escalates further. There was a short pause. Fatgum sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. That's very Eraserhead, he said tiredly, though not entirely disagreeing. Aizawa didn't respond to that. He simply turned fully toward the hall again. Stay here, he added, voice firm. I'll report back once I understand what I'm walking into. And with that, the Erasure hero left the room and slinged towards where every Zenith member are at. So we're putting all the students from UA on the island? Izuku asked, looking around the large oval conference table where the Zenith leadership had gathered. His tone was careful, but there was clear concern beneath it. Not just you, just replied calmly, seated at the head of the table. 3 other schools as well, Shiketsu, Ketsubutsu, and Ci. At his side, a white short-haired woman with sharp side bangs leaned slightly forward, her expression steady but serious. Those schools were included because the League of Villains and the Meta Liberation Army have targeted them one too many times, she added. A few of the agents around the room shifted at that, the weight of the statement settling in quickly. Not only that, one of the agents continued, we've just confirmed that the League and the MLA are joining forces. That's concerning, Gura said from her seat nearby, arms crossed as she processed the implications. It is, Robin agreed evenly, her tone noticeably more grounded than usual. That's why this is necessary for the hero student's safety. The woman at Choa's side nodded once before continuing, already moving the discussion forward. We've already sent invitations to the principals of those schools, and they've agreed. Her gaze shifted across the table as she assigned roles without hesitation. Robin, you'll be escorting Yue. Robin gave a small nod in acknowledgement. Cobra, the woman continued, turning to a bald teen with a red mark on the left side of his head, you're with Shiketsu. He responded immediately. Yes, ma'am. Peter, she said next, gesturing to a plain-looking teen wearing a black and white jacket, you're with Ketsubutsu. Understood, he replied simply. And Raja, she added, looking toward a shirtless dark-skinned boy with gray hair, you're escorting Ci. Got it, he said with a calm nod. The room settled for a moment after that, the assignments clear, the tone serious, and the scale of the situation fully established. Why are we even doing this for them? The voice cut through the room with blunt disinterest. An orange-haired young man in a dark, long-collared cloak finally spoke, arms folded and posture rigid. Unlike the others, he didn't seem moved by urgency or cooperation. He looked irritated more than concerned. This isn't our problem, Roger continued. It's society that made them a threat in the first place. A quiet pause followed over everyone, as the one if the highest figure spoke. Roger. Izuku muttered under his breath, clearly familiar with this kind of response. I'm serious, Roger said, not backing down. I'm not taking part in this project. Come on, Roger, an orange-haired girl protested from further down the table, leaning forward dramatically. You're our top one, she whined. At least Himari agreed to help. Beside Roger, a purple-haired girl with green eyes gently took hold of his hand, her tone much softer. Come on, Himari said quietly. Do this for us. Roger grumbled under his breath, clearly annoyed at being cornered from multiple angles. His shoulders tensed for a moment before he exhaled sharply. Fine. He muttered. All right. Our big boss is in. The orange-haired girl cheered immediately, throwing both hands into the air. Roger ignored the celebration entirely, his expression remaining stern as he looked toward Jus. As long as we know what they're planning to do, he said. All for one managed to steal an artifact created by the first super users. Something that lets him enhance non-super users with supra energy. The mood in the room shifted instantly. Several members straightened. Even those who had been casual before now looked more focused. That is why we must act, Thus said firmly from the head of the table. Super Z is far more powerful than its impure imitation they call quirks. The silence that followed was no longer uncertain. It was the silence of everyone understanding the scale of what was now at stake. Damn it, how did that BSD even get his hands on that artifact? The question came from a black-haired young man dressed in layered green garments, his frustration clear as he leaned forward in his seat. The room's tension only deepened with every new piece of information. Roger clicked his tongue quietly, but didn't interrupt this time. Even he seemed to recognize that this had moved beyond simple resentment. Akira turned his attention across the table, his expression focused as he addressed one of the newest additions to the room. Nagant, he said, voice steady. Have you gained any intel on the MLA? The purple-haired former hero gave a small shake of her head, her posture composed despite the attention on her. Only partial information, she answered. Enough to confirm movement and contact points, but not enough to determine their full operational structure. A few members frowned at that. Partial intel meant uncertainty, and uncertainty meant risk. "Aw man," a red-haired young woman with side bangs muttered from nearby, sounding genuinely disappointed. Her features hinted at mixed heritage, probably Brazilian, and her tone carried a lively cadence even in the middle of serious discussion. "I hate it when you're only given crumbs," she added, slumping back in her chair. "Makes everything messy, eh?" Robin glanced sideways at her. "That may be the most accurate strategic summary anyone said today." A few low chuckles broke the tension for only a second before the room settled again. Hess folded his hands on the table. "Then we proceed with what we do know," he said calmly. "The League and the MLA are moving together. All for one has obtained something he should not possess. That is enough reason to mobilize." No one argued with that, they all agreed with it. "Then the meeting is concluded," J.S. said firmly, rising slightly from his seat as his voice carried across the large conference room. "Everyone proceed with your assigned tasks. Agents, maintain control over the quirked individuals and ensure stability across the island." Gentle Agent gave a composed nod, adjusting his posture. "Understood." La Brava followed immediately beside him, just as attentive. "We'll handle it." Nagant, along with several other agents scattered around the table, also acknowledged the order in quiet agreement, their expressions focused and professional. "And my children," Ness added, his tone softening just slightly, though still carrying authority, "continue doing your best." The top 21 members present, including Izuku, all nodded in unison. The weight of the situation remained, but the structure of command was clear. One by one, chairs shifted and footsteps echoed as the group began to disperse from the massive hall. Conversations broke into smaller, quieter exchanges as everyone moved toward their respective duties. Outside the room, above the corridor's upper structure, a familiar figure remained still. Aizawa was there, partially concealed in the shadows of the architecture, his scarf hanging loosely as he observed the tail end of the meeting. His eyes narrowed slightly as he absorbed what he had just overheard, taking in names, roles, and implications without interrupting the flow below. From his position, he didn't move immediately. He simply stayed silent, watching the dispersing agents and leaders, piecing together what this zenith structure truly meant in practice rather than theory. Aizawa stayed motionless above the corridor, partially hidden by the structure as the last of the meeting's voices faded into movement and footsteps below. His eyes tracked the dispersing agents, but his focus was already locked on what he had heard rather than what he was seeing. "Supra?" he muttered under his breath, voice low and analytical. "They're speaking about it like it's a separate power system, or it actually is." His gaze narrowed slightly as he replayed those words in his mind. "And they're all quirkless." That detail didn't sit right with him. Not in the usual sense of quirkless being powerless, but in the way they spoke, operated, and structured themselves. It suggested something fundamentally different from the hero society he knew. His expression tightened slightly as another name surfaced in his thoughts. "And what is Lady Nagant doing here?" That one carried more weight. He had known her reputation, her past, and the circumstances surrounding her disappearance from hero society. Seeing her in a structured command role within Zenith didn't line up with any official records or assumptions. "Hey, Bakugo and Todoroki are back." Kirishima called out the moment he spotted them entering the common room. A few heads turned immediately, the earlier tension easing just a bit at the familiar faces. "Hey, how were your supplementary classes?" Mina asked, practically bouncing as she leaned forward. "It was fine," Todoroki replied calmly, slipping his hands into his pockets. "We learned a lot." "Yeah, of course we did well," Bakugo added with a low grumble. "I'm great." Despite his words, his tone was its usual rough self, though not as explosive as before. Todoroki's gaze moved across the room, taking in the worn expressions, the bandages, the way some of them were sitting more carefully than usual. His eyes narrowed slightly. "What happened to some of you guys?" he asked. There was a brief pause before Kaminari let out a dry laugh. "Training," he said. "If you can even call it that." "More like getting completely wrecked," Aways added from the side, still sore. Kirishima scratched the back of his head with a grin that didn't quite hide the impact it had on him. Some of us fought some of the Zenith members, he explained. Man, they're on a whole different level. Jairu let out a quiet sigh from her seat. And that's putting it lightly. Todoroki glanced between them, clearly processing the seriousness in their voices. That bad? He asked. Let's just say, Kaminari muttered, leaning back, we didn't win a single match. Bakugo clicked his tongue at that, eyes narrowing slightly. Figures, he said, though there was a flicker of interest in his expression now. If I were there, I'd mop the floor with all of them, Bakugo declared without hesitation, folding his arms as if it were the most obvious outcome in the world. Whatever you say, man, Jiro replied with a tired but supportive grin, clearly not in the mood to argue after everything they had been through. Cocky as always, Monoma mocked from the side, adjusting his posture with a smug look. You're really not one to say that, Tokage shot back immediately, not even bothering to hide her annoyance. Before the bickering could continue, the atmosphere in the room shifted as Aizawa stepped inside. His presence alone was enough to quiet most of the room, especially with the expression on his face. Mr. Aizawa's back, Shiro said, straightening slightly. How was it? Did you find something interesting, sir? The pro-heroes nearby also turned their attention toward him, the earlier casual chatter fading as they waited for his response. Even Bakugo stopped speaking mid-thought, sensing the seriousness in Aizawa's demeanor. Aizawa didn't answer immediately. His eyes swept across the room once, taking in every student, every injury, every exhausted expression. Then he exhaled slowly, as if organizing everything he had just witnessed and heard. Interesting isn't the word I'd use, he said finally, voice low and controlled. Concerning fits better. Oh no, is it something bad? Nijire asked, gripping Ryukyu's shoulders as she leaned forward anxiously. Eraser, what exactly did you find? Ryukyu followed up, her tone calm but serious. Aizawa didn't sugarcoat it. They were talking about the League of Villains, he said. They've joined forces with a group called the Meta Liberation Army. The Meta what? Kaminari asked, blinking in confusion. Momo stepped forward slightly, her expression already sharpening as she pieced things together. A liberation-focused extremist organization, she explained carefully. If they've merged with the League, that dramatically increases both their numbers and their coordination. That's putting it lightly, Fat Gum added, his arms crossing as his usual relaxed demeanor faded. Ida adjusted his glasses quickly, posture stiffening. An alliance of that scale could destabilize the entire hero system. That's not all, Aizawa continued, cutting through the rising tension. UA isn't the only target. 3 other schools are involved, Shiketsu, Ketsubutsu, and CI Academy. That drew immediate reactions from both classes. Shoto spoke up next, recalling something he had heard before. Now that you mention it, one of Shiketsu's students was attacked before the provisional license exam, he said. Her name was Kami, I think. A few students exchanged uneasy looks at that. Aizawa gave a small nod. That lines up with what I heard. These attacks aren't isolated. They're coordinated. The room fell into a heavier silence than before. This was something much bigger, something none of them could ignore anymore. That's why, Aizawa continued, his voice steady but carrying weight. Their leader decided to bring all students from those 4 schools to this island. Not just hero courses. Everyone. First years to third years. That landed harder than anything else he had said so far. Wait, all of them? Kaminari asked, eyes widening. That's like a ridiculous number of people. It's basically relocating multiple entire schools, Momo added, her mind already running through the logistics. Housing, security, training, coordination. That's not something you do unless the threat level is extremely high. Ida straightened sharply, fists clenched at his sides. This is no longer a precaution. This is a full defensive measure. More like a lockdown, Jira muttered under her breath. Kirishima scratched his head, looking uneasy now. So they're expecting something big to happen, right? Aizawa didn't immediately respond, which was answer enough for some of them. Fat Gum exhaled slowly. If they're gathering that many students in one place, he said, then this island isn't just a training ground anymore. It's turning into a stronghold. And a target, Night Eye added quietly. That word made several students tense up. Todoroki's gaze lowered slightly in thought. If the League and the Meta Liberation Army are working together, he said, then this could be preparation for a large-scale attack. Silence followed. Even Bakugo didn't immediately respond this time. His eyes were narrowed, not in arrogance, but in focus. Aizawa finally spoke again. You're no longer just trainees on a field trip, he said. You're part of a controlled environment designed to keep you alive. That made the situation clear in a way nothing else had. Hawk stayed quiet for a moment after speaking, his usual relaxed demeanor replaced with something more thoughtful, almost distant as he replayed Robin's words in his head. Night Eye noticed it immediately, his sharp gaze narrowing slightly. I feel like you know something we don't, number 2, he said evenly. Hawks exhaled lightly, then shrugged as if he'd decided there was no point holding it back. Just recalling something Robin told me, he began. Back when she explained why she's always out in the open like that. Yagi stepped into the room at that moment, having just arrived. I was about to ask about that, he said, looking between them. Hawks nodded once. She said something along the lines of, an object lost for centuries was detected and recovered by someone, he explained. And she was tasked with finding that person. A brief silence followed as the weight of that statement settled in. Momo's expression tightened slightly as she processed it. An object lost for centuries. She repeated quietly. That suggests something from the pre-Quirk or early Quirk era. Possibly something of historical or technological origin. Fat Gum crossed his arms, thinking it through. And if someone found it already, then it's not just history anymore, he added. It's active. That aligns with what I heard from Zenith's side, Aizawa said next, drawing everyone's attention immediately. The room shifted as all eyes turned toward him. They were discussing an artifact created by their earliest members, he continued. It allows non-supra individuals to be granted supra energy. A heavier silence fell over the group. Supra, several voices repeated almost at once, confusion spreading across the room. Aizawa exhaled through his nose, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly as the weight of what he had said settled across the room. I said too much, he muttered flatly, already turning toward the exit. I'm going to sleep. That drew a few immediate reactions. Wait, Mr. Aizawa. Shinso started, stepping forward instinctively. But Aizawa didn't stop. He simply raised a hand slightly in dismissal, not even looking back. Process it yourselves, he added, voice dry but final. I've already done enough talking for one night. Fat Gum scratched his head, letting out a slow sigh. That's very on brand for him, he muttered. Momo remained still for a moment, her mind clearly still working through everything she had just heard. Supra energy, she repeated quietly under her breath, as if trying to anchor the term in logic. An external energy system granted through an artifact. Kaminari leaned back in his seat, staring at the ceiling. I thought training was the crazy part of this trip, he said. Now it feels like we walked into a whole different world. Bakugo clicked his tongue. Doesn't matter what they call it, he muttered. If it's power, we'll deal with it. A few students glanced at him, but no one argued. Hawks stayed where he was for a moment longer, gaze drifting toward the direction Aizawa had gone. Yeah, he said quietly, almost to himself. That's usually how it starts.